Why does it never feel like enough? You reach the goal, the salary increases, the savings grow, and still the hunger remains. This is not ambition, it's something deeper, more elusive, more dangerous. The mind creates new needs faster than money can satisfy them. The ancient Greeks warned us about this. Plato wrote of pleonexia, the insatiable desire to have more than one's share. It is not the lack of wealth that torments us, but the presence of endless wanting. In Buddhism, this cycle is called tanha, the craving that fuels suffering. Not need, not survival, craving. French philosopher Jean Baudrillard took it even further. He said, "We live in a world where there is more and more information and less meaning. More possessions, more data, less depth, less peace." The Stoic Seneca once said, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor." Every time you refresh your bank account, chase the next investment, or scroll past lives more glamorous than yours, ask yourself, do you want more? Or do you just want to feel like you are enough? Because in the pursuit of infinite wealth, we often bankrupt the self. You think you're free, but are you? Money promises freedom. Freedom to choose, to roam, to own your time. But somewhere along the way, that promise becomes a prison. Because the more you chase financial independence, the more entangled you become in systems designed to keep you dependent. Wealth buys choices, but also anxieties. It buys time, then fills that time with fear of loss. In his two concepts of liberty, Isaiah Berlin warned of positive freedom, the idea that freedom can become a justification for domination. We convince ourselves we are acting freely, even when every move is dictated by debt, social expectation, or the need to maintain our status. The philosopher Erich Fromm said, "Modern man is in flight from himself, enslaved by the very things he thinks will liberate him." Wealth gives the illusion of control, but when your self-worth is tied to your net worth, you are not free. You are shackled, not by chains, but by invisible systems you were taught to worship. Jean-Jacques Rousseau once wrote, "Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. In the age of money, those chains are gold-plated, silent, polished, worn with pride." Consider this. If tomorrow all the money vanished, would you still know who you are? Would you still feel whole? Or has your freedom always belonged to something else? In trying to own the world, many have forgotten how to own themselves. What does it mean to grow? Every headline celebrates it. GDP is up, markets are bullish, profits are rising. But behind the numbers, what's actually growing? Growth, in its current form, has no soul. It does not ask who suffers, what is lost, at what cost. We treat progress like an equation, but no equation includes the grief of the exploited, the burnout of the overworked, or the silence of the forgotten. In Capital, Karl Marx warned that capitalism turns people into commodities, not just workers, but consumers, identities, even relationships. He wrote, "Capital is dead labor, that vampire-like only lives by sucking living labor." We praise companies for growing fast, even when that growth leaves forest in ruin, communities hollowed out, souls mechanized by productivity. Philosopher Hannah Arendt spoke of the banality of evil, the quiet, bureaucratic machine that does harm without malice, without conscience. Economic growth is often that machine. John Stuart Mill once said, "The worth of a state in the long run is the worth of the individuals composing it." Yet we measure the worth of a nation not by its compassion, but by its consumption. Think about the job that drains you, the product you didn't need but bought anyway, the landfill overflowing, the person who works so hard but cannot afford to rest. This is what we call growth. But growth that ignores the soul is just decay with better marketing. How much is your time worth? And who decided that number? You wake up early, you sit in traffic, you answer emails, smile through meetings, hit deadlines, and then a deposit appears. Your time, converted into numbers on a screen. It feels like progress. But what if you're trading the most sacred thing you have for the most artificial thing ever created? The Stoic philosopher Seneca warned us long ago, people are frugal in guarding their personal property, but as soon as it comes to squandering time, they are most wasteful. Money can be saved. Time cannot. There is no refund, no rollover, no account balance for the years you gave to jobs you hated, to tasks that drained your spirit, to routines that blurred the line between living and surviving. In Being and Time, Heidegger wrote that human existence is fundamentally defined by temporality, that we are not just in time, we are time. So when you sell your time, what exactly are you selling? The poet Khalil Gibran said, "You give but little when you give of your possessions. It is when you give of yourself that you truly give. Your labor is not just effort. It's your life, broken into hours, exchanged for permission to exist within a system that calls it earning. Think of all the moments lost behind screens, the sunsets you didn't see, the laughter you were too busy to hear, the passions shelved until someday. Someday never deposits interest. It only takes. So ask yourself, are you making a living or slowly giving your life away? What is something really worth if the price is a lie? A diamond sparkles under glass and is called priceless. A mother cradling her child in exhaustion is unseen, unpaid. The market rewards rarity, luxury, demand. But what about meaning? What about love? What about pain, presence, care? Value is not real. It is constructed, assigned by cultures, industries, and algorithms that often confuse worth with price. In Das Kapital, Marx revealed a fundamental contradiction. Commodities have both use value and exchange value, but the world worships only one, the one with a dollar sign. David Graeber, in Debt, The First 5,000 Years, argued that money doesn't just measure value. It creates it, reshapes it, and in doing so, destroys all that can't be measured. A life-saving teacher is paid less than a brand influencer. A tree, alive, is worthless on a spreadsheet. But chopped down, it has value. This isn't economics, it's erasure. A quiet rewriting of reality to suit what can be bought and sold. Nietzsche once wrote, "The most common lie is that which one lies to himself. Lying to others is relatively an exception. And the greatest lie we tell ourselves is that the market always knows what something is worth. You are not your income. Your relationships are not transactions. Your grief cannot be monetized, and your joy will never be on sale. So remember this the next time someone tells you what you're worth, their number may be high, their title may be impressive, but true value? It's invisible. And maybe that's where the sacred lies. How much do you need to feel safe, and why does it never feel like enough? You save, you invest, you plan. You surround your life with locks, insurance, walls, numbers. It feels like security. But it's just the illusion of control in a world that refuses to be tamed. Because no matter how high the balance grows, a single accident, diagnosis, or disaster can unravel it all. Philosopher Zygmunt Bauman described modern life as liquid, constantly shifting, uncertain, fragile. He wrote, "Security without freedom is slavery, and freedom without security is chaos. Wealth tries to buy both, but often ends up delivering neither. The mind that fixates on financial protection can become a fortress so guarded it forgets how to live. We tell ourselves, if I just reach this number, then I'll rest. But the world keeps moving. The goalpost shifts, and safety never arrives. Not truly, not permanently. Alan Watts once said, "The desire for security and the feeling of insecurity are the same thing." What protects you may also be the thing that keeps you afraid. You build the nest, you count the eggs, you prepare for storms that may never come. But in the process, you miss the sky, because wealth might protect the body, but it can also imprison the spirit. And in trying so hard not to lose, you may forget how to live. What if you reached the number and still felt hollow? You hit the milestone. 6 figures, 7. The digits climb. You refresh the page, again. And for a moment it feels like purpose. But numbers don't hug you. They don't laugh with you. They don't sit beside you when the room goes quiet. They just sit, cold, silent, indifferent. The philosopher Albert Camus wrote that life is absurd when it's stripped of meaning, and yet we go on, searching for it in systems that cannot give it. Finance is measurement, but meaning is immeasurable. A child's laughter has no currency. A sunset has no ticker symbol. A friend's forgiveness can't be charted. In man's search for meaning, Viktor Frankl reminded us, those who have a why to live can bear almost any how. But the why is not in the number. The number is only ever the how. Blaise Pascal once wrote, "All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. So we chase numbers, not to live, but to distract ourselves from living. Your account balance grows. But do you? Your profits increase. But does your peace? Numbers are useful, but they are not the point. They are tools, not truths. Symbols, not soul. So if you find yourself staring at spreadsheets in the dark, ask not what they're worth, but what they're missing." When did earning become more important than caring? We praise profit, we reward growth, we applaud efficiency, but behind every gain, someone may be losing. A factory squeezes out more units by cutting breaks. A hospital reports higher margins by reducing staff. A business thrives by ignoring the people who helped build it. This is the ethical inversion, where what works is allowed to replace what's right. In the theory of moral sentiments, Adam Smith, often cited as the father of capitalism, warned us of this very thing. He wrote, "All for ourselves and nothing for other people seems in every age of the world to have been the vile maxim of the masters of mankind. The irony is sharp. The man most associated with free markets never believed they should come without morality. Today, profit is not neutral. It is often extracted from silence, suffering, or systemic blindness. But we rarely question it, because it's working, because the numbers look good. But a society that places profit above people cannot call itself successful, only efficient." Noam Chomsky once said, "The system protects itself with a veneer of moral legitimacy. The paycheck becomes a shield, the title becomes a justification, the suffering becomes invisible. Think of the products you use, the clothes you wear, the food you eat. Ask, who made this? Who suffered? Who was ignored so I could save $2? And if the answer is uncomfortable, that's the point. Because a world that places price over pain, margin over meaning, profit over people, is not just broken, it is upside down. Why does poverty still exist in a world that overflows? Every day, tons of food are thrown away. Homes sit empty while people sleep on streets. Medicines exist, but not for those who can't afford them. We are surrounded by abundance, yet scarcity persists. Not because there isn't enough, but because access is controlled, not by nature, but by systems. The French philosopher Michel Foucault once said, "Where there is power, there is resistance." And in modern economies, power doesn't just control supply, it controls distribution. Scarcity is often manufactured, not to preserve resources, but to preserve value, because what is rare can be sold. This is the quiet logic of artificial lack. Not enough homes? No. Too many are owned and held as assets. Not enough food? No. Too much is wasted to protect prices. Not enough medicine? No. Too many patents gatekeep what could heal. We live in what the philosopher Ivan Illich called a radical monopoly, where abundance is hidden behind invisible walls. Buckminster Fuller once said, "We are called to be architects of the future, not its victims." But when we are told there's not enough, we fight each other, instead of asking who is controlling the gate. Scarcity is not always real. Sometimes it's strategy. Sometimes it's silence. Sometimes it's just what we've always been told. But remember this: the world has enough. Enough food. Enough shelter. Enough possibility. The tragedy is not in the lack of things. It's in the lack of will to share them. When did your paycheck start deciding your self-worth? We were born valuable. Before diplomas, job titles, or bank accounts, we mattered. But somewhere along the way, we were taught to measure our worth by what we earn, not who we are, not how we love, not what we give freely, just income. And if we earn less, we feel like less. In The Sane Society, psychoanalyst Erich Fromm wrote that modern humans are alienated from nature, from each other, and most of all, from themselves. He warned, "If I am what I have, and if what I have is lost, who then am I?" This is the core of the inversion. You are told you need to deserve dignity. You must earn the right to rest, to heal, to matter. But this is a lie sold by a system that cannot profit from unconditional worth. It's why the unemployed feel ashamed, why artists feel like imposters, why care work, so essential, is treated as secondary. Because if something doesn't generate revenue, the system pretends it isn't valuable. Bell Hooks once wrote, "The function of art is to do more than tell it like it is. It's to imagine what is possible." But how many artists stopped creating because it didn't pay? How many souls were silenced in the name of being practical? You are not a salary. You are not your productivity score. You are not a spreadsheet waiting for approval. You are worth more than what the system can measure. You always were. So if the world tells you otherwise, it is the world that is confused, not you. What happens if you prepare for life so long, you forget to live it? We are told to plan, to sacrifice today for tomorrow, to save for retirement, delay gratification, invest in the future. But in the name of security, we postpone joy. In the name of responsibility, we deny presence. And sometimes that long-awaited future never arrives. In Being and Time, Martin Heidegger wrote that humans exist in anticipation. We are always towards something, the next step, the next goal, the next chapter. But in always living toward tomorrow, we risk abandoning today. We hoard money for vacations we're too burned out to enjoy. We defer dreams until our bodies ache and our spirit grows tired. And when the calendar finally clears, Sometimes there's no time left. The philosopher Alan Watts captured this when he said, "No valid plans for the future can be made by those who have no capacity for living now." Planning is wise, but postponing life until it's convenient is a quiet form of self-erasure. Khalil Gibran wrote, "Your children live in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. The future is a house we never get to live in. Only guess at, only build, brick by brick, while today fades behind us. What if you spent your whole life preparing and forgot how to be alive? What if someday was just a mirage designed to keep you compliant? You can be wise. You can be responsible. But don't let the future steal your present, because money may grow with time, but time never grows back." Who are you? When you stop introducing yourself by what you do. From the moment we step into adulthood, we are asked, "What do you do?" Not, "Who are you?" Not, "What do you love?" But, "What do you produce?" We become the freelancer, the executive, the unemployed, the investor. Economic roles become our identity masks, and the deeper we wear them, the easier it is to forget there's a person underneath. Sociologist Irving Goffman wrote about the presentation of self in everyday life, how we perform roles to fit into systems. But what happens when the role replaces the self? The philosopher Simone de Beauvoir warned of this too, noting that we become objects in the eyes of others, defined not by our essence, but by how we function in society. These labels are convenient, but they are also cages. Middle class, blue collar, six-figure earner, below the poverty line. Each one distorts who we really are into something legible for a spreadsheet. Virginia Woolf once asked, "Why are women so much more interesting to men than men are to women?" But beneath her words was a deeper idea. That identity, when shaped by the outside, can never fully honor what lives inside. You are not your tax bracket, not your LinkedIn title, not your last invoice. You are not a product. And yet, the world will keep trying to sell you back to yourself, in pieces labeled professional, productive, valuable. But who are you when no one's watching? Who are you when no one's asking what you earn? That answer is the beginning of freedom. What happens to a system that only knows one word? More? More sales, more production, more output, more growth, always growing, never arriving. In nature, growth has limits. Trees stop reaching, rivers find balance. Even the body knows when to rest. But the economy does not. It is taught to rise forever, even when the cost is collapse. Philosopher Herbert Marcuse, in One-Dimensional Man, warned that modern industrial societies pursue progress without questioning what they are progressing toward. He called it repressive rationality. Systems so obsessed with expansion, they lose sight of meaning. We extract, we burn, we consume, all in the name of growth. GDP increases, but forests vanish. Markets soar, but oceans rise. We call it success, but it often looks like suicide in slow motion. Edward Abbey once said, "Growth for the sake of growth is the ideology of the cancer cell, and like a cancer, unchecked growth consumes its host until there's nothing left to feed on. What good is more if it empties the earth, if it frays your nerves, if it steals your time, your breath, your stillness? A healthy economy should nourish life, not devour it." So perhaps the goal is not infinite expansion, but intelligent sufficiency. Not more, but enough. Because if we don't choose where to stop, the collapse will choose for us. What if your freedom is quietly chained to the very system you dream of escaping. We chase financial independence, the dream of freedom. No boss, no debt, no limits. But here's the paradox. To become financially free, you must often depend on markets, on stocks, on platforms, on trends. You rely on dividends from companies you don't control, currencies backed by trust you didn't build, and algorithms that were never built for your benefit. Independence becomes another form of entanglement, just dressed in better language. Jean-Jacques Rousseau famously wrote, "Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. The modern chains are invisible, they refresh in real time. They live in dashboards, brokerage apps, and tax codes. Even the path to escape is paved by systems you can't step outside of." The philosopher Byung-Chul Han calls this the achievement society, where we believe we are free, but are merely self-exploiting within systems that profit from our effort, our optimism, and our isolation. You win, but the system always wins more. As Yuval Noah Harari wrote in *Sapiens*, money is the most universal and most efficient system of mutual trust ever devised. But what happens when that trust becomes dependency? What happens when your liberation plan depends on the very machine you wish to escape? Maybe you'll retire early. Maybe you'll break free. But freedom that relies entirely on fragile systems isn't freedom. It's just permission. And permission can be revoked. So ask yourself, are you building freedom from the outside in, or from the inside out? Because real independence isn't about leaving the system. It's about not being owned by it. If most of the money in your life isn't real, what exactly are you working for? You wake up, check your balance, swipe a card, tap a phone, send a payment, but nothing ever touches your hands. No gold, no bills, no coins, just numbers, floating in invisible servers, authorized by institutions, validated by trust. In The Philosophy of Money, Georg Simmel wrote that money's power comes not from its substance, but from our collective belief in its function. He said, money is a claim upon society. But what happens when that claim is no longer backed by anything you can see, touch, or truly understand? 90% of the world's currency exists only in digital form. It is not held. It is not printed. It is remembered by machines. You're not earning value, you're earning data. And that data can vanish, shift, or be manipulated without your consent. Money has become a ghost, a symbol of security that lives nowhere, yet governs everything. As anthropologist David Graeber wrote, money is not a thing, it is a social relationship. And relationships, especially ones built on faith, can be fragile. If your wealth is just pixels on a screen, how much of your life have you given to shadows? And if the system holding those shadows fails, what do you really have? We've traded something ancient and tangible for something instant and hollow. So ask yourself, do you possess your money, or does the illusion of it possess you? Can a gift be pure if it's built on someone else's suffering? A billionaire donates millions. A corporation launches a charity wing. An industry funds a scholarship. It looks like kindness. It sounds like progress. But beneath the surface, there's a shadow. Because too often, generosity is built on the very systems that create the need for it. Exploitation makes the fortune. Philanthropy repairs the image. And so the system cleans itself without ever changing. Philosopher Slavoj Žižek once said, "The worst slave owners were those who were kind to their slaves, because their kindness dulled the critique. It made injustice bearable, and therefore sustainable." Modern philanthropy can function the same way, not as disruption, but as preservation. In Winners Take All, Anand Giridharadas argues that elite giving often protects the very hierarchies it claims to fix. It soothes public anger, distracts from unfair labor practices, and lets wealth signal morality without accountability. Oscar Wilde once wrote, "Charity creates a multitude of sins. It does not erase the harm, it buries it beneath applause." So the next time you see a donation, a foundation, a well-timed act of corporate compassion, ask, what came before this gift? Who was hurt so this could look good? Because not all generosity is innocent, and sometimes the most celebrated acts of giving are just elegantly disguised acts of survival for the system, not the soul. What if the more comfortable you become, the more disconnected you are? The fabric softens, the rooms grow larger, the silence becomes quieter. You've arrived in luxury. And yet, something still aches. Something still feels distant, numb, unmoved. Because while comfort wraps the body, it does not always reach the soul. The philosopher Epicurus warned us not against pleasure, but against confusing it with fulfillment. He taught that simple pleasures nourish most: friendship, contemplation, freedom from fear. Luxury, on the other hand, often seduces through excess. It offers stimulation, not stillness. In The Society of the Spectacle, Guy Debord explains how modern life replaces direct experience with representations of experience, commodified, packaged, sold. Luxury becomes not about enjoyment, but display, not about peace, but performance. And in the process, we forget how to feel without a price tag. Henry David Thoreau once said, "The cost of a thing is the amount of life which is required to be exchanged for it." But luxury hides that cost beneath packaging, prestige, and polish. It tells you you're special, even as it starves your connection to what's real. There's nothing wrong with softness, with beauty, with ease. But if your soul feels silent inside silk sheets, if your laughter echoes in a room built for display, if the more you have, the less you feel, then maybe luxury didn't elevate you. Maybe it replaced you, because the soul cannot be seduced by marble countertops. It longs for something deeper, something that doesn't need to be bought, because it was never for sale. What if no one ever truly did it alone? We love the story of the self-made man, the bootstrap myth. From nothing to everything, rising by grit, winning by will. But behind every success story, there are unspoken names, invisible hands, systems, privileges, safety nets that rarely make it into the narrative. Because the myth only works if it erases the map behind the mountain. In The Veil of Ignorance, philosopher John Rawls challenged us to imagine a fair society, one designed by people who don't know what position they'll be born into. In that thought experiment, would anyone design this system? A world where zip code determines opportunity, where inherited wealth multiplies quietly, and where generational struggle is reframed as individual failure. The self-made myth ignores this. It pretends the game was fair, so the winner can claim all the credit. But as Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote, it is as though we have run a race and someone has cheated, and then we simply say, let's start from here. Pulitzer Prize-winning author Isabel Wilkerson reminds us, you may not have built the house, but you live in it. We inherit systems, some designed to elevate, some designed to exclude. And pretending otherwise is not just dishonest, it's dangerous. So the next time you hear self-made, listen for the silence, the mother who sacrificed, the worker who wasn't paid enough, the roads, the schools, the infrastructure, the laws. all the scaffolding we never see. No one does it alone, and if someone tells you they did, they've either forgotten or want you to. Because the myth of the self-made man doesn't just glorify success, it justifies inequality. Why is the work that holds us together so often the least rewarded? The nurse who comforts a dying patient, the teacher who stays late to reach a struggling child, the parent who wakes up every 2 hours to feed a baby, the caregiver who sacrifices their own needs to tend to another's. These are not luxuries. They are the foundations of life. And yet, they are paid the least, respected the least, protected the least. Because in the economy we've built, care is invisible, and empathy doesn't scale. In The Human Condition, Hannah Arendt drew a distinction between labor, work, and action. She noted that modern society often elevates productivity above relationality. What can be built over what can be nurtured? But without care, the machine breaks down. Without empathy, civilization becomes sterile. Economist Marilyn Waring wrote, "If women and unpaid work were counted in GDP, every economy in the world would collapse from the weight of its true debt." The system doesn't just undervalue care, it depends on that undervaluing to function. As Bell Hooks once said, love is an action, never simply a feeling. And yet, in the financial world, love has no line item, compassion has no compound interest, kindness has no market value. Look at who holds this world together, who cleans, feeds, teaches, heals, who listens without charging, who gives without needing applause. Then look at the paycheck, the benefits, the respect. We don't just devalue care, we deny its power. But someday, when the systems fail and the machines stop and the noise dies down, it is care that will remain. Because what cannot be priced may be the only thing that's truly priceless. What if the things we pay the most for mean the least? A diamond costs thousands, but can't hold your hand. A luxury car turns heads, but won't wait for you when you cry. A penthouse can overlook the city, but never makes you feel at home. This is the paradox. We place a price on things that glitter, but ignore the value of what sustains us, because price is visible, loud, legible to the world. But value, true value, often whispers. Philosopher J.G. Ballard once observed that consumer society sells not products, but fantasies of identity and worth. We buy to be seen, to be envied, to be validated, but in the process, we mistake expense for essence. In Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, Robert Pirsig writes, "The truth knocks on the door and you say, 'Go away, I'm looking for the truth.' We overlook real value because it doesn't come in packaging. It doesn't carry a receipt. It can't be insured. The things that hold the most meaning, a handwritten note, a deep conversation, a quiet sunrise, cost nothing. And so the market ignores them." Oscar Wilde once said, "Nowadays people know the price of everything and the value of nothing." A warning, a mirror, a wound still open in modern life. So much of our energy goes toward acquiring what is costly. But what if what we needed was never expensive to begin with? What if the things that ground us, heal us, connect us, were always there, waiting to be noticed, not bought, not chased, just felt? Because in the end, you won't remember what you paid for. You'll remember what made you feel alive. Why do we envy lives that may be quietly falling apart? Scroll through your feed, a stranger's vacation, a friend's promotion, another influencer's perfect home. We don't just see success. We consume it. We absorb images like currency, as if beauty, lifestyle, and wealth can somehow be downloaded into our own sense of worth. But envy in this age is no longer personal. It is systemic, engineered, profitable, because comparison now lives in your pocket, and every second you feel small, someone else is making money. In the Ethics, philosopher Baruch Spinoza wrote that envy is pain at another's good fortune. But what if the fortune is fiction? The smile filtered, the wealth exaggerated, the success manufactured for clicks. And yet, we feel the ache, not because we're greedy, but because we've been conditioned to measure our value against the illusion of someone else's highlight reel. Social comparison was once limited to your village. Now it stretches across continents, fueled by algorithms that know exactly how to trigger your insecurities. In a monetized society, your dissatisfaction is a business model. Philosopher Alain de Botton once observed, "Status anxiety is the price we pay for believing in a meritocratic world. We think what we see is deserved, so if we don't have it, we assume we've failed. But here's the truth. Most of what you envy isn't real, and what is real is rarely shown, because the loudest displays of wealth often conceal the quietest moments of emptiness. So the next time envy rises, don't ask what they have. Ask what you've forgotten to appreciate, because in a world that monetizes your longing, the most radical act is to feel whole, with less." What if you were born already owing something? Student loans, credit cards, mortgages, medical bills. Debt is no longer a phase, it's a default. You enter adulthood with numbers already against you, sign contracts before you fully understand them, and carry balances that feel like they were never meant to be paid. Because modern life is financed, and freedom is billed monthly. In debt, the first 5,000 years, anthropologist David Graeber explained that debt is not just economic, it is moral. We are made to feel guilty for what we owe, ashamed of falling behind, responsible for being trapped in systems never designed for our escape. But debt is often not about irresponsibility. It's about survival in a world where the cost of existing keeps rising and the safety nets keep shrinking. You work to repay, but the goalpost moves. You refinance, but the interest accumulates. You try to live, but the balance never forgives. As Graeber put it, there's no better way to justify inequality than by pretending that the rich are productive and the poor are not. Debt becomes the story we're told about ourselves, that we deserve this burden, that we owe the system for letting us live inside it. You weren't born to be a debtor, but somehow you've become one, not just to banks, but to bosses, to landlords, to the calendar, to a world that keeps raising the cost of belonging. But remember, owing money is not the same as owing shame, and debt may be part of this system. But it doesn't define your soul, because the real debt we carry isn't financial. It's the time we lose trying to earn our right to simply be. What happens when you are no longer seen as a person, but as a number, a credit score, an employee ID, a tax bracket, a productivity metric? Your name becomes a login. Your story becomes a KPI. Your pain becomes a statistic. In the logic of capitalism, the human is abstracted, flattened into data points, fed into systems that calculate value without ever asking who you really are. In the dialectic of enlightenment, critical theorists Adorno and Horkheimer warned us of instrumental reason, the reduction of everything, including people, into tools for efficiency. The world becomes a spreadsheet, and people, just cells to be filled. The deeper this mindset goes, the more empathy is replaced with output, and life is judged not by meaning, but by margins. You're no longer a teacher, your test scores. You're not a patient, your billable hours. Not a human being, but an economic unit. Albert Einstein once said, "Not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted." But in today's economy, only what can be measured gets attention, and what cannot is left behind. Have you ever felt invisible in a room full of performance reviews? Ever felt reduced by a form, a chart, a score? That's not failure. That's the system working exactly as designed. But you are not a number. You are not your output. And you don't have to be profitable to matter. Because the moment we stop seeing each other as people is the moment we stop being a society. What happens if we all stop believing in money? Your bank account, your savings, your investments, all built on a shared illusion that this piece of paper, this line of code, this digital number has value. But it only does because we all agree that it does. Money works not because it's backed by gold or anything physical. It works because of trust, collective, unconscious trust. And if that trust breaks, everything built on top of it begins to crumble. In Sapiens, Yuval Noah Harari reminds us, money is the most universal and most efficient system of mutual trust ever devised. But it is also the most fragile, because what we call a crisis is often just a moment of lost faith. Banks collapse not when they run out of money, but when people think they might. A run on the bank is not a financial problem, it's a psychological event, and the entire global economy is stacked like dominoes on top of these quiet, invisible assumptions. The economist John Kenneth Galbraith once said, "The process by which money is created is so simple that the mind is repelled, and in that simplicity lies the danger, because what's easily created can also be easily doubted." So much of your life is shaped by money. You work for it, you save it, you dream through it. But the thing itself, it's not real. Not in the way love is. Not in the way pain is. Not in the way you are. So ask yourself, if society is built on belief, what happens when belief fades? Maybe that's the real crisis. Not inflation, not recession, but disillusionment. A quiet collapse. Not of the market, but of meaning. What if you gave everything you had and still felt nothing? You wake up early, you stay late, you sacrifice weekends, passions, and sometimes even your health. You work hard, harder than most, and still you feel empty. You did everything they said would lead to success, and yet success never became satisfaction. This is the paradox of modern labor: effort without essence, achievement without alignment, output without meaning. In The Working Life, Joanne Keula wrote that modern society doesn't just want us to work, it wants us to believe in our work, to find identity in it, purpose in it. But the truth is, many of us are working jobs that do not reflect our values, our dreams, or our potential. Jobs that sustain the machine, but not the spirit. The philosopher Simone Weil said, "To be rooted is perhaps the most important and least recognized need of the human soul. And yet we are taught to move, hustle, upgrade, never to root. We work to avoid guilt, to prove ourselves, to survive, but rarely to feel whole." As the writer David Foster Wallace once asked, how much of life is spent simply running from the feeling of having wasted it? And that question, quietly, haunts even the most successful among us. Maybe it's not about working harder. Maybe it's about asking why. Why give your energy to something that doesn't give something back? Why measure a life by what it produced, instead of what it meant? You are not here to just clock in, clock out, and hope someone applauds at the end. You are not a machine, and a life spent working without fulfillment is not noble. It is stolen. What if everything you've been working for arrives when you're too tired to enjoy it? Work now, rest later, push through, retire early. That's the promise. Sacrifice your youth, your energy, your curiosity, so that one day, decades from now, you can finally live. But what if that one day never comes? Or worse, what if it comes too late? In The Death of Ivan Ilyich, Leo Tolstoy writes of a man who climbs the social ladder only to ask, on his deathbed, "What if my whole life has been wrong?" It's a quiet terror, the kind that doesn't strike in a single moment, but builds year after year, plan after plan, until the body slows and the soul forgets what it once wanted. The philosopher Alan Watts warned of this in his talks. We thought of life by analogy with a journey, and the point was to arrive. But the whole thing was a musical thing, and you were supposed to sing or to dance while the music was being played. But we postpone the dance, we delay the music, all in service of a finish line we may never cross. Seneca once wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. And the greatest waste is not in rest, but in the waiting." How many birthdays were missed for meetings? How many sunsets unseen because the shift wasn't over? How many mornings did you rush through, telling yourself it was for something later? But life is not a savings account. You cannot deposit time now and expect it to grow back with interest. So maybe the question isn't, when can I afford to retire? Maybe it's, how much living can I reclaim before then? Because the greatest tragedy is to spend your best years preparing for a freedom you may never meet. Why does the world pay more to destroy than to heal? A CEO makes millions cutting jobs. A teacher struggles to pay rent. A hedge fund manager gambles with markets and is rewarded. A social worker saves lives and is barely thanked. This is the quiet absurdity. What you're paid has almost nothing to do with what you're worth. Not morally, not socially, not spiritually. But in a system built on profit, contribution is measured in capital, not in care. In The Price of Inequality, economist Joseph Stiglitz writes, "Markets by themselves often fail to recognize the value of what matters most. Because markets reward what is scarce, not what is essential. They prize demand, not dignity. And so we end up with a world where an ad executive earns more than an ambulance driver, where selling attention is more lucrative than saving a life, and where the value of a human being is obscured by the size of their paycheck. But money is not a mirror. It reflects what's profitable, not what's meaningful. As Kurt Vonnegut once wrote, "We are what we pretend to be, so we must be careful about what we pretend to be." And the system pretends that price equals value, that wealth equals contribution, that high income means high impact. But deep down, we know better. Think of the people who shaped you, the ones who showed up, who listened, who gave more than they ever asked for. Now ask yourself, did they earn the most, or did they give the most? Because until we learn to separate wage from worth, we will continue to confuse status with service and wealth with wisdom. And in that confusion, a society forgets what and who truly matters. What happens when the system no longer needs to understand you, to control you? Every second, trades are made by machines, portfolios adjust, markets shift, values rise and fall, not by human hands, but by lines of code. You apply for a loan, and an algorithm decides your future. You invest, but never meet the mind behind the market, because there isn't one. We are no longer ruled by kings, we are governed by formulas, and most of them, you'll never see. In Weapons of Math Destruction, Kathy O'Neill explains how data-driven systems can perpetuate bias silently and at scale. She writes, "Algorithms don't make things fair. They automate the status quo. These systems don't ask who you are. They ask how you score, your credit, your click rate, your risk profile. And when you're denied, there is no one to argue with. No one to understand your story, just a black box that said, no. And somewhere on the other side of the world, a hedge fund's bot makes $1 million, faster than you can blink. As philosopher Shoshana Zuboff warns in The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, we are no longer the subjects of our own data, but the raw material for its extraction. You don't just use the system, you feed it. And it grows, faster, smarter, colder. You may think you're in control, but when your worth is calculated by math you'll never see, when your future is shaped by a system that can't hear your voice, that's not freedom, that's automation. The new tyrant doesn't wear a crown. It runs silently in the background, unblinking, unquestioned, and maybe the most terrifying part is that we built it ourselves. What if every raise made you feel a little emptier? You got the promotion, the bonus landed, the balance grew, and yet something faded, something you can't quite name. The irony is sharp. You earn more, and somehow you feel less time, less presence, less joy in the small things. You thought money would bring freedom, but instead it brought more obligation, more complexity, more noise. In The Conquest of Happiness, Bertrand Russell wrote that much of modern misery comes from boredom and the fear of boredom. So we chase stimulation. We pile on goals, milestones, financial targets, mistaking motion for meaning. But as income rises, so too do expectations. Lifestyle expands, pressure grows. We become trapped in a system where the next level is always just one raise away. And so we never stop climbing, even when the summit disappears into the fog. As Alan Watts once observed, you can't live at all unless you can live fully now. But high earners often live later. They postpone, they protect, they prepare. Until now is gone. You may be earning more than ever. But are you still able to feel wonder, to sit in stillness, to breathe without checking the time? Because wealth should bring space, not just speed. And if all your earning has created distance from the life you once loved, then maybe it's not income you're chasing anymore. Maybe it's reconnection to yourself, to others, to something that doesn't fit in a paycheck. What happens to love when everything becomes a transaction? A friend becomes a contact. A conversation becomes content. A dinner becomes networking. Affection becomes branding. The language of intimacy has been replaced with the vocabulary of commerce. We don't just share, we leverage. We don't just connect, we optimize. Even our most sacred relationships are now filtered through screens, likes, and performance. And somewhere in the chase for relevance, we forget how to be real. In The Saturated Self, psychologist Kenneth Gergen warned that in modern life, we are surrounded by so many constructed versions of identity that we lose touch with authentic presence. Monetization amplifies that effect. Your partner becomes a co-brand. Your friend's success feels like competition. Your private moments are shaped by what might go viral. You don't connect to connect. You connect to be seen. And in that pursuit, intimacy thins. Trust weakens. Everything starts to feel like performance. Sociologist Zygmunt Bauman once said, "In a consumer society, relationships are easily formed and just as easily abandoned. Because when everything is built on attention, Depth becomes inconvenient. Think of the last time someone looked at you without checking their phone, or when you said, "I love you," without a filter, without an agenda, without trying to sound profound. Those moments are vanishing. Because in a monetized world, connection is often measured in engagement, not in meaning. But true intimacy cannot be scaled, it cannot be sold, and it will never go viral. It simply sits with you, quietly, completely, and asks nothing but your presence. Who are you when every piece of you is sold separately? You're a driver in the morning, a designer at noon, a delivery person by night, a side hustle on weekends, a personal brand in between, multiple apps, multiple roles, multiple versions of self. The gig economy offers freedom, but often at the cost of coherence. You no longer live a single life. You live in fragments, task by task, rating by rating, always shifting, never whole. In The Divided Self, psychiatrist R.D. Laing warned that fragmentation of identity leads to alienation, not just from others, but from ourselves. And that's what gig work often creates, a life of constant motion where you are not allowed to be, only to perform. Each platform demands a new persona. Each algorithm rewards a new hustle. And so you shapeshift until you forget what you were before you became everything. This isn't freedom. It's a life outsourced to the marketplace. As Byung-Chul Han writes in The Burnout Society, we are no longer subjects of obedience, but projects of performance. And the gig economy turns you into a project that never ends. No pause, no arrival, only the next opportunity. When was the last time you said, "This is who I am," without following it with what you do for income? Because when every hour is billed, when every skill is sold, when every identity is split between platforms, you stop being a person. You become a profile. And somewhere in that hustle, you disappear. What is the cost of stillness in a world that profits from your noise? Scroll, post, refresh, repeat. You're told to stay active, stay engaged, stay visible, because silence is risky, not just personally, but financially. In this world, your voice is a commodity, your attention, a product, and your stillness, an unmonetized moment, a missed opportunity. So you speak even when you have nothing to say. You share even when you have nothing to give. You stay loud because silence makes you disappear. In Noise, A Human History, David Hendy suggests that silence has always been a space of power for reflection, resistance, and renewal. But in a monetized society, silence is waste. Time not filled is money not earned. Pauses are punished. Rest is guilted. Even meditation becomes content. Even vulnerability becomes performance. As philosopher Blaise Pascal once observed, all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. And in today's world, sitting quietly feels like failure. The poet Rainer Maria Rilke once wrote, "The only journey is the one within, but that journey has no ad revenue, no views, no engagement rate, and so it's ignored." Have you noticed how hard it is to be still, to be offline, to be unproductive, without shame? That's not an accident. That's design. But silence is not absence. It's presence. It's healing. It's where you remember who you are beneath the noise. And if a world built on profit fears your silence, maybe your silence is where your power lives. What if your resistance was already for sale? Rebellion used to be dangerous, messy, personal, a threat to the system, but now it's a slogan on a t-shirt, a filter on a photo, a limited edition collaboration. Even dissent has a brand. Even protest has a price tag. What was once a challenge to the status quo is now another way to sell you back to yourself, just with better design. In Society of the Spectacle, Guy Debord warned that modern life turns even its critics into consumable imagery. Rebellion is no longer destroyed, it's absorbed, marketed, distributed. You wear the message, you hashtag the cause, but the system stays intact. In fact, it thrives on your desire to feel different, by selling you the illusion of revolution without any of the risk. Cultural critic Mark Fisher once said, "It's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism." Because capitalism doesn't just survive critique, it thrives by turning critique into a product. So ask yourself, is your rebellion real, or is it monetized? Was it felt in silence or posted for likes? Does it cost you comfort or just convenience? Because rebellion isn't what you wear. It isn't what you buy. It's what you refuse to become, even when the world offers to sell it back to you with free shipping. Who are you? When the only thing the world sees is what you earn. You introduce yourself by your job. You measure your progress by your pay. You feel worthy when the numbers go up and ashamed when they don't. Your income isn't just a number anymore. It's become your reflection, your personality, your identity. And somewhere in the climb, you stop asking who you are and start asking what you're worth, not to yourself, but to a market. In The Fall of Public Man, Richard Sennett explores how modern society has turned private identity into a public performance, measured by material signals. What you drive, where you work, what your tax bracket says about your place in the world. And the deeper you go, the harder it is to separate yourself from your salary. The system doesn't just reward success, it absorbs it, until the money isn't what you earn, it's who you become. As Bell Hooks once wrote, being oppressed means the absence of choices. But even among the privileged, the illusion of choice can become another form of captivity. Because when identity is tied to income, every decision becomes a transaction. Even selfhood has a price. So ask yourself, if your paycheck disappeared tomorrow, would your sense of self survive? Could you still speak your truth without a title? Could you still feel proud without a platform? Because the more we conflate earning with essence, the more we risk becoming strangers to ourselves. You are not your income. You are not your resume. And if you've forgotten who you are without them, that's not your failure. That's the system's design. What if the way you handle money isn't really about money at all? You flinch at spending. You overwork even when you don't need to. You save obsessively, or you spend to feel momentarily alive. But these behaviors didn't start with you. They were passed down, shaped in silence, transmitted through stories, habits, and fear. Because money isn't just currency. For many, it's memory. A memory of lack, of scarcity, of instability. And that memory lives on, even if your circumstances have changed. In The Body Keeps the Score, Bessel van der Kolk explains how trauma doesn't just live in the mind. It lodges in the nervous system. It affects how we react, relate, protect, and provide. Economic trauma is no different. It shows up in the child who saw the lights get shut off, the parent who hid their tears behind bills, the family dinners that tasted like anxiety. And even as adults, we carry those ghosts, not just emotionally, but financially. A poverty mindset can survive long after poverty ends, because safety once denied is not easily trusted. As Resmaya Menachem writes, trauma in a person decontextualized over time looks like personality. Trauma in a family looks like family traits. And trauma in a society looks like normal. So if you panic when your account dips, or feel guilty spending on joy, or overcompensate to avoid dependence, pause. It may not be about the money. It may be about the memory. You are not lazy. You are not broken. You are carrying weight you didn't create, but now must learn to put down. Because healing isn't just emotional. Sometimes it's financial. And sometimes the most radical act is believing you deserve peace, even if no one before you ever had it. Can you truly shop with a clean conscience in a world built on unseen hands? You choose the eco-friendly product. You read the label. You pick the brand that gives back. It feels good. It feels responsible. It feels ethical. But beneath the surface of every product lies a long, tangled story. One of hands you'll never see, minds you'll never visit, factories you'll never enter, and pain you were never meant to feel. In No Logo, Naomi Klein dismantled the myth of ethical branding, arguing that corporations often sell values instead of practicing them. And in the age of global supply chains, ethics are outsourced. The coffee is fair trade, but the shipping isn't. The phone was assembled safely, but the cobalt was mined by a child. Every purchase is a trade, but not all the costs are visible. Not all the suffering has a receipt. We've been sold the illusion that our morality can be bought, as long as we pick the right brand. But if consumption remains the engine, the system remains intact. Author Arundhati Roy once said, "There's really no such thing as the voiceless. There are only the deliberately silenced or the preferably unheard, and global supply chains are built on silence. So no, you can't shop your way out of injustice. You can't buy redemption in a system designed to hide its consequences, but you can be aware. You can ask questions. You can resist the lie that your choices are pure just because the packaging says so. Because ethical consumption, in a system built on exploitation, isn't the solution. It's the symptom of a world that asks consumers to carry the guilt, while the machine keeps running." What does it do to a person to constantly feel behind? You check your feed. A friend just bought a new car. Another is vacationing on an island. Someone else just hit 6 figures at 28. You're not unhappy until you compare. And suddenly, everything feels insufficient. Your home, your income, your pace, your path. Nothing changed except the frame you saw it through. In a comparative economy, contentment becomes conditional. Self-worth becomes volatile. And joy becomes harder to feel. In the theory of moral sentiments, Adam Smith observed that much of human ambition is fueled by comparison, not by need. We want to be seen, to matter, to measure up. But in today's world, we compare against highlights. We compete with illusions, and we internalize our perceived failure as personal inadequacy. Sociologist Thorstein Veblen called this conspicuous consumption. Spending to signal status, to be admired, envied, or at least not forgotten. But the more we compare, the more fractured we become. As Alain de Botton wrote, "There is no such thing as a society without envy, but the scale of it can be managed." Right now, the scale is crushing us. You were never meant to live your life against someone else's scoreboard. You were never meant to wake up and measure your value by a stranger's curated image. But that's what a comparative economy demands. Constant performance, endless proof, and quiet despair. So maybe peace doesn't come from catching up. Maybe it comes from stepping off the track altogether, because your life was never meant to be a contest. It was meant to be yours. What if the thing you're building your life on was never meant to hold you? You want security, a steady job, a reliable future, something to count on. So you invest, you plan, you save, you try to control the chaos, but deep down, you feel it. The volatility, the cracks beneath the surface, the markets fluctuate, rent increases, industries collapse overnight, and the harder you work for stability, the more fragile the world around you seems to become. In Anti-Fragile, Nassim Nicholas Taleb writes that some systems grow stronger with stress, but our economic systems often do the opposite. They're built for motion, for disruption, for acceleration, and yet we seek peace inside them. We build dreams inside structures that are inherently temporary. The philosopher Zygmunt Bauman called this liquid modernity, a world where nothing solid lasts, where jobs, relationships, even identities are in constant flux. And in that world, stability isn't just rare, it's almost unthinkable. As James Baldwin once said, the world is mostly composed of people who are trying to hold on to things they have no right to hold on to. And maybe that includes the illusion of permanence. You were promised a solid ground, a clear path, a fair game. But maybe the system was never built for that. Maybe it was built to shift, to churn, to keep you reaching, but never resting. So if you feel exhausted chasing safety, you're not failing, you're awakening. Because true stability may not come from the system. It may come from knowing who you are when the system shakes. Why were you expected to survive a system? No one ever taught you how to navigate. Interest rates, credit scores, compounding, debt structures, retirement accounts. You were thrown into it. A world of invisible rules, quiet penalties, and language designed to confuse. And somehow, you were expected to know how it all worked, how to budget, how to invest, how to make your way. But no one taught you. Not in school, not at home, not where it would have mattered. Because financial literacy, it's treated like a privilege, not a foundation. In Pedagogy of the Oppressed, Paulo Freire emphasized that true education is never neutral. Systems or challenges them. And a system that withholds knowledge about how money works, how wealth is built, how traps are set, is a system that profits from your confusion. When only some people are taught the rules, it's not a game, it's a strategy. As activist Angela Davis said, we have to talk about liberating minds as well as liberating society. Because if you don't understand the system, you can't question it. And if you can't question it, you'll blame yourself when it fails you. If you've ever felt ashamed for not knowing how to manage money, pause. That shame does not belong to you. It belongs to the structures that kept you uninformed so they could keep you in place. Financial education should be a birthright, but it's been turned into a gate. And the tragedy isn't just who gets left out, it's who never even knew there was a door to begin with. What if the tools you thought were fair were built with silent bias, a credit score, a loan application, an algorithm that decides your rate, your risk, your reality? We're told these tools are neutral, that the numbers don't lie, that the formulas are fair, that data replaces discrimination. But data doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from history, from policy, from a past that was never neutral to begin with. And when those histories are baked into the tools, bias becomes code, and inequality becomes efficiency. In Algorithms of Oppression, Sophia Umoja Noble reveals how supposedly neutral systems like search engines and financial software often reflect and reinforce the power structures they claim to transcend. She shows that tools are not passive, they're shaped by priorities, and priorities come from people. People with interests, agendas, blind spots. A facial recognition program is more accurate with lighter skin. A lending algorithm penalizes neighborhoods by zip code. A hiring filter screens out applicants with non-traditional education. All the while, the system says, it's just math. But math, without justice, becomes another kind of mask. As Ruha Benjamin warns in Race After Technology, when discrimination is woven into the digital fabric, the fix isn't just code, it's consciousness. And consciousness is exactly what the system tries to keep you from having. So if you've ever been denied, rejected, or penalized by a number you didn't understand, know this. It wasn't always about you. Sometimes it was about a system that pretended to be fair, producing the same old harm. Neutrality is the lie. The truth is in the patterns. And until we reprogram the values behind the tools, they will keep reflecting the same broken world, just with cleaner fonts. Why do we still believe in not enough, in a world that overflows? There's not enough time, not enough money, not enough jobs, not enough to go around. This is the myth we're told, again and again, that scarcity is real, that competition is natural, that if someone wins, someone else must lose. But look closer. We live in a world of infinite code, endless content, limitless digital potential. We can print money with keystrokes, replicate knowledge in seconds, stream ideas across borders, borders across time. This is not a world of scarcity. It's a world of manufactured limits. In post-scarcity anarchism, philosopher Murray Bookchin argued that with the rise of technology and automation, scarcity should no longer define how we live, yet it still does. Why? Because scarcity is useful to those in power. If people believe there's not enough, they'll compete instead of cooperate. They'll hoard instead of share. They'll fear instead of imagine. The delusion of scarcity keeps the system intact. It turns abundance into anxiety and possibility into pressure. As Buckminster Fuller once said, we are called to be architects of the future, not its victims. But it's hard to build the future when you're taught to fight over crumbs in a bakery filled with bread. So if you've ever felt that there's not enough, pause. Ask who benefits from that belief. Ask who told you to fear sharing, to distrust plenty, to compete in a game where the rules are hidden. Because maybe the scarcity is not in the resources, but in the imagination. And once you stop believing in not enough, you might see that abundance was always there. It was just kept out of reach. What if the thing that's draining you is the very thing you were praised for? You work late. You answer emails on weekends. You skip meals, skip rest, skip joy, all in the name of drive, ambition, success. They call you high-performing. They call you committed. But the truth is, you're exhausted, and they're calling it fulfillment. This is not passion. It's a ritual of burnout, polished with productivity apps and dressed in titles. In the Burnout Society, Byung-Chul Han writes that modern capitalism no longer needs to oppress us because we now exploit ourselves. We internalize the need to perform. We self-surveil. We chase goals that never end, believing that overextension is a badge of honor. The system doesn't demand slavery anymore. It demands self-sacrifice, voluntarily offered in exchange for purpose that never fully arrives. And the tragedy is this: burnout doesn't always look like collapse. Sometimes it looks like excellence. As Audre Lorde warned, caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. Because in a system that thrives on your depletion, rest is resistance. So if you're tired, but praised, if you're hollow, but promoted if you're breaking, but still called driven. Ask yourself, is this really your dream? Or is this the version of success you were told to chase? Because true fulfillment doesn't burn you out, it restores you. And any system that teaches otherwise was never meant to serve your soul, only your output. What if the more you earn, the more you need? You start with just enough. Then you get the raise, and suddenly enough moves. You upgrade, you expand, you fill the new space with new things. And what once felt like abundance now feels like a baseline. You chase more, not because you're greedy, but because the system quietly told you, this is normal now. This is the paradox of modern life. We don't just have more. We need more to feel the same. In Civilization and its Discontents, Freud warned that civilization produces neuroses by demanding we repress our instincts to fit into its version of order. Consumerism works the same way, by inventing new needs, then rewarding you for meeting them with just enough emptiness to keep going. Sociologist Juliet Shaw calls it the overspent American, people who earn more than ever but feel poorer because social comparison and lifestyle creep inflate our expectations faster than income can catch up. So no matter how far you climb, you're always just a little behind. You're always almost there. As Epicurus once said, if you wish to be rich, do not add to your money but subtract from your desires. But desire is now designed, manufactured, targeted, monetized. And so we keep inflating until even contentment feels like something we can't afford. So if you feel like you have more, but enjoy it less, if your lifestyle has improved. But peace feels further away. That's not a personal flaw. That's the trap working perfectly. Because in a world where need inflates faster than joy, you will never feel full, no matter how much you have. And maybe the real wealth is knowing when to stop. What if you've been selling your freedom for $9.99 at a time? You subscribe to convenience, to comfort, to content. One click, and it's yours. The music, the movies, the meals. You never notice the cost, because it's small, recurring, and invisible. Until one day you check your statement and realize your life is rented, your peace is metered, your world is paywalled. In The Disappearance of Rituals, philosopher Byung-Chul Han describes how modern life is defined by fragmentation, by constant microtransactions that replace meaning with function. Subscriptions are the perfect example. You no longer own, you access. You no longer choose. You scroll. You don't remember the last time you truly wanted something. Only that you forgot to cancel the free trial. This is the quiet tyranny. Freedom disguised as flexibility. Choice disguised as obligation. Every month, a tiny draft. Not just from your bank account, but from your attention, your memory, your autonomy. As author Douglas Rushkoff warns, we are no longer the customers of tech platforms. We are the products. And with subscriptions, you don't just buy access. You surrender rhythm, ownership, and the ability to opt out entirely. Look around. How many things in your life are quietly rented? Your software, your music, your comfort, your self-worth? You don't notice the weight until it's all attached to invisible strings. And the most dangerous prison is the one that feels like convenience. Because once everything is automatic, you stop asking if you even wanted it at all. What if the freedom you're buying is just another form of control? You want time, so you pay for speed. You want peace, so you pay for silence. You want escape, so you buy the trip, the course, the retreat. But every liberation seems to have a checkout page. Freedom in this world is branded, packaged, marketed back to you. And slowly, without noticing, you begin to believe that freedom is something you can only have once you've paid for it. In Discipline and Punish, Michel Foucault warned of systems that don't use force, but internalize discipline. Structures so ingrained, you police yourself. Modern capitalism works the same way. You pay to unlock rest when you were always allowed to rest. You pay to access your attention when you were born with it. The world tells you you're not free until you upgrade, subscribe, or level up. But true freedom doesn't come from purchase. It comes from permission. And the system profits from your belief that you don't have it yet. As Wendell Berry once wrote, people are fed by the food industry, which pays no attention to health, and treated by the health industry, which pays no attention to food. We keep paying to fix problems the system quietly created. You don't need to buy the silence. It's already within you. You don't need to earn rest. It was always yours. You don't need to purchase presents. You just need to stop selling your attention. Because real freedom isn't behind a paywall. It's behind a decision. To stop outsourcing your life to a world that keeps raising the price of what you already have. When did being alone become something you had to pay for? You book a silent retreat. You download a mindfulness app. You rent a cabin in the woods. You pay for quiet, for disconnection, for the right to be with yourself. And yet, solitude was once free. It was sacred. It was yours. Now it's a feature, a product, a service with a subscription. In Walden, Henry David Thoreau escaped to the woods not to flee society, but to hear himself again. He believed solitude was the soil of truth, a place where the self could grow without distortion. But today, solitude is branded, packaged as a luxury experience, marketed to burned-out minds as if it were an exotic escape, not a human need. And the cruelest irony, even in our solitude, we are never truly alone. We're still tracking it, still optimizing it, still sharing it. The world sold us back our own silence. As poet May Sarton once wrote, loneliness is the poverty of self. Solitude is the richness of self. But when solitude is commodified, it becomes harder to tell the difference. You don't need to retreat to a mountain. You don't need a minimalist app. You don't need to buy silence. You just need to remember that solitude is not a purchase. It's a permission to disconnect, to sit, to listen. Because if the world keeps selling you the space to be alone, what it's really taking is the belief that you could have had it all along, for free. What if the last thing left to sell is your soul? Your thoughts are content. Your pain is marketable. Your dreams turned into data. Every moment becomes a story. Every story becomes a post. Every post becomes engagement. And somewhere along the way, you forget where you end, and the brand begins. The deepest parts of you, your empathy, your art, your grief, your wonder, are now monetizable assets, and the human spirit has become a business model. In the culture industry, Theodor Adorno warned that capitalism would not just shape our behavior, it would flatten our imagination. The sacred becomes spectacle, the soul becomes spectacle, and the act of being human becomes content. Even spirituality is now an algorithm. Meditation apps, authentic influencer vulnerability, healing packaged for virality. But when the spirit becomes strategy, when joy becomes a trend, when suffering becomes a brand, we lose the one thing that can't be replicated: depth. As Thomas Merton wrote, we are so obsessed with doing that, we have no time and no imagination left for being. And being is exactly what cannot be bought, sold, or scaled. So if you feel empty after sharing, tired after producing, disconnected after expressing what should have felt sacred, that's not failure. That's your soul resisting the marketplace. You are not a product. You are not a pitch. And the human spirit, yours, mine, ours, was never meant to be profitable. It was meant to be. What happens to wonder when everything must have a reason? You look at the stars and Google their distance. You see a butterfly and ask what species. You hear a song and check how many streams it has. Nothing is just experienced anymore. It is analyzed, quantified, compared. We used to marvel. Now we measure. And slowly, without noticing, we begin to forget how to simply be in awe. In Technopoly, Neil Postman warned that when a culture surrenders itself to technology, it begins to view the world only through the lens of what can be counted. Mystery becomes inefficiency. Poetry becomes fluff. Silence becomes awkward. We trade wonder for data, curiosity for clarity, and in our quest to know everything, we lose our reverence for the unknowable. The philosopher Abraham Joshua Heschel called this radical amazement a way of seeing the world not as a problem to solve, but a miracle to behold. But radical amazement doesn't trend, it doesn't monetize, and so it fades. As Albert Einstein once said, "He who can no longer pause to wonder and stand wrapped in awe is as good as dead." And a measurable world makes that pause harder and harder to find. So if the sky no longer stirs you, if silence makes you anxious, if beauty feels like background noise, it's not that the world has become less magical. It's that the metrics have gotten louder. But wonder still lives here, in the pause, in the questions without answers, in the moments that refuse to be explained. And if you want to feel alive again, you may not need more data. You may just need to look up and let yourself not understand. What if distraction wasn't a side effect, but the point? You pick up your phone to check one thing, then 20 minutes vanish. You scroll, swipe, consume, but don't quite remember what you saw. You feel drained, but still keep going. This isn't a lack of discipline. It's not laziness. It's a design. Because in the attention economy, obedience doesn't look like submission. It looks like scrolling. In amusing ourselves to death, Neil Postman warned us that the greatest threat to truth isn't censorship, but distraction. A society doesn't need to be silenced if it's too entertained to ask questions. And now, obedience comes not through force, but through fatigue. Infinite content, endless updates, notifications as chains. The philosopher Hannah Arendt described totalitarianism as the destruction of the space between thought and action. Today, we fill that space with noise. We aren't stopped from thinking. We're just never left alone long enough to start. As Marshall McLuhan once said, the medium is the message. And the message now is simple. Stay distracted. Stay passive. Stay consuming. Because the more distracted you are, the easier you are to manage. You think you're in control. But the tabs are always open. The feed is always infinite, and your mind is always occupied, but never truly present. This isn't an accident, it's an economy, and your attention is the currency. So if you feel like you're forgetting how to think deeply, how to sit still, how to truly question, that's not your failure. It's the cost of obedience in a world built to distract you from your own awakening. What if the greatest trick the system ever pulled was convincing you there was no alternative? You wake up, you work, you consume, you scroll, you sleep, repeat, You feel tired, but you call it progress. You feel numb, but you call it normal. And you wonder, quietly, if this is just what life is. Everyone around you is doing the same. So it must be right. Right? But what if this isn't the truth, just the most profitable version of it? In Capitalist Realism, cultural theorist Mark Fisher wrote, "It's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. That's the final illusion. Not just that the system works, but that it's unchangeable. You're told the grind is noble, that endless growth is inevitable, that burnout is a badge of honor, that buying freedom is the only kind there is. But these aren't truths. They're narratives, stories we've repeated so many times we've forgotten to question them. As Ursula K. Le Guin once said, we live in capitalism. Its power seems inescapable. But then, so did the divine right of kings. What feels permanent is often just what hasn't been challenged. Yet. So if you feel trapped, disillusioned, disconnected, you're not broken. You're awake. You're beginning to see the shape of the cage. And the final illusion, that there's no door. But there is. And it begins the moment you whisper to yourself, this isn't the only way. Because the future isn't written. The system isn't sacred. And your life was never meant to be an endless loop of survival. It was meant to be lived, freely, fully, and on your own terms. If everything can be sold, what's left to be sacred? The system took your time and turned it into billable hours. It took your joy and made it into branded lifestyle content. It took your attention and sold it to the highest bidder. And yet, deep beneath the noise, the scroll, the schedule, a question waits. What is meaningful when the money is removed? Because meaning cannot be monetized. Not real meaning. Not the kind that anchors you in the storm. In Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl wrote that survival alone is not enough. Humans require purpose, a why to endure the how. He said, those who have a why to live can bear almost any how. But modern life offers substitutes for meaning, achievement, aesthetic, productivity, and we confuse them for purpose. Because they're visible, because they're measurable. But true meaning rarely fits in a metric. It lives in the unseen, in the unprofitable, in the slow, quiet, deeply human moments that cannot be bought. Poet Mary Oliver once asked, tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? And no salary, no subscription, no screen can answer that for you. Maybe the greatest rebellion is not escape, but reconnection. To what matters? To what moves you? To what no one else can define or monetize or steal? You don't need to be more efficient. You need to remember who you were before the world told you what to be. Because in the end, meaning is not given by a system. It's not calculated in views, income, or scale. Meaning is recovered in presence, in purpose, in the small, quiet truths that were waiting for you, long before money ever spoke. What if the answer wasn't more, but enough? You were told to grow, to expand, to scale. Your life became a graph, always rising, never resting. But what if the chase for more isn't a sign of ambition, but of emptiness? And what if the cure isn't to reach higher, but to pause and ask, when was I already enough? In Small is Beautiful, economist E.F. Schumacher challenged the religion of endless growth, arguing that sustainable systems and sustainable lives are built not on excess, but on balance. He wrote, infinite growth is neither possible nor desirable. Enough is better. But enough doesn't sell. It doesn't trend. It doesn't make headlines. So we keep reaching, upgrading, optimizing, until we no longer know what enough feels like. Lao Tzu once said, "He who knows he has enough is rich, not the one with the biggest number, but the one who finally stops counting." Look around, not at what's missing, but at what's already here. Your breath, your body, the people who stayed, the moments that made you feel alive without asking for a receipt. This is enough. Not because it's perfect, not because it's finished, but because it holds you without condition. Enough isn't the end of ambition. It's the beginning of peace. And in a world that tells you to always want more, choosing enough is a quiet, powerful revolution. What if the most valuable thing you can give is the one thing no one can buy? You can give money. You can give time. You can give things. But in a world of notifications, distractions, and endless obligations, the rarest offering is your presence. To be fully here. To listen without waiting to speak. To look someone in the eye and mean it. In today's economy, presence is poverty. There's no productivity in stillness, no ROI in silence. And yet, this is where life happens. Not in the hustle, not in the feed, but in the breath between moments. In The Art of Loving, Erich Fromm wrote that real love is not a feeling. It's an act of being. And to truly love, you must first learn to be present. But presence has been devalued. Attention is fragmented. We multitask through connection and call it closeness. We give people our time, but not ourselves. And slowly, our relationships become efficient, but empty. As Thich Nhat Hanh once said, the most precious gift we can offer anyone is our attention. Because to be truly seen, even for a moment, is to feel real again. So maybe presence is the currency we've forgotten how to spend, not because we lack it, but because we've been trained to withhold it, to save it for later, to offer it only when it matters. But presence is the moment. It's what makes anything matter. So today, give what the world keeps taking from you. Not your money, not your metrics, but your full, honest self. Right here, right now. Because in the end, presence is the only wealth you take with you. What do you lose when you never get to disappear? You're reachable, always. A ping away, a swipe away, a vibration in your pocket, calling you back to obligation. You answer texts while you eat. You reply to emails before bed. You say, "I'm always here if you need me." But when are you here? For yourself. We call it accessibility, responsiveness, professionalism. But beneath the surface, there's something deeper. Erasure, the erosion of boundaries, the vanishing of solitude, the quiet disappearance of your right to not respond. In the Burnout Society, Byung-Chul Han writes that modern life has replaced external pressure with self-imposed availability. We perform our exhaustion. We pride ourselves on our access. And we mistake overextension for value. But constant availability is not a virtue. It's a symptom of a world that treats humans like systems, that expects presence without presence, connection without rest, service without separation. Psychologist Carl Jung once said, "Solitude is for me a fount of healing. Without it, I lose myself in the world." But today, solitude isn't just scarce, it's considered selfish. So if you feel drained, scattered, irritable without knowing why, ask yourself, when was the last time you were unreachable? Not by accident, but by choice. You are not an emergency line. You are not a live feed. You are a human being. And boundaries aren't walls that keep people out. They're doors that lead you back to yourself. Because if you are always available to everyone, you will eventually become unavailable to the one person who matters most, you. What if the thing that feels urgent is quietly keeping you from what actually matters? You check the notification, you reply to the message, you say yes because you have to, because it feels important, because it feels now, but most of it isn't. The ping isn't a fire. The email isn't life or death. The deadline is rarely as fixed as it feels, yet your nervous system doesn't know the difference. You live in a constant state of alert, responding, reacting, rushing, and all the while, life, quiet, slow, sacred, passes unnoticed. In 4,000 Weeks, Oliver Burkeman writes that most urgency is not about the task, but about avoiding the deeper discomfort of not feeling in control. We crave urgency because it gives us clarity. But that clarity is often a trap, because while you're putting out fires, you're ignoring the fire within, the dream you've delayed, the conversation you avoid, the stillness that feels too quiet. As Annie Dillard reminds us, how we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives. And if every day is spent chasing what's urgent, your life will never make space for what's true. So ask yourself, what have you postponed in the name of being responsible? What moments have been missed because your phone buzzed? Because false urgency doesn't just waste your time, it steals your attention from the things that don't scream, but are quietly waiting for you. Joy, presence, love, grief, growth. None of them shout. They whisper. And if you only follow the loudest voice, you may miss the one that matters most. What if you've spent your life building something that was never really yours? You followed the map. You checked the boxes. You climbed the ladder, only to look around and wonder whose life this actually is. It's not broken. It's not terrible. But it feels distant, like a role you're playing, a version of yourself you were taught to become. And now, something deep within you is quietly asking, can I leave? In The Second Mountain, David Brooks writes about the transition from a life of achievement to a life of depth. He calls it the moment when success no longer satisfies, when the climb stops feeling like ascent and starts feeling like escape. This is where many people find themselves, high-achieving, well-regarded, externally validated, but inwardly unanchored. The exit isn't loud, it's not dramatic, it's a quiet shift, a gentle but firm turning away from a life of shoulds toward a life of truth. As Clarissa Pinkola Estes writes in Women Who Run with the Wolves, if you have ever been called defiant, incorrigible, forward, cunning, insurgent, unruly, or rebellious, you are on the right track. Because choosing yourself in a world that benefits from your obedience is the bravest exit of all. So if the life you're living looks successful, but feels misaligned, you're not ungrateful, you're awakening. If you feel something calling you, even if you don't know what it is yet, listen. The exit doesn't have to be fast. It doesn't have to be loud. It can be slow, gentle, deliberate. A quiet turning back toward your soul, a soft reclaiming of the story you never stopped yearning for, because the life you were meant to live might still be waiting, right on the other side of letting go. What if your freedom doesn't begin with what you accept, but with what you refuse? We are taught to say yes, to be agreeable, to stay open, to never close a door, burn a bridge, or walk away. Yes is rewarded. Yes is liked. Yes is polite. But every yes you give without alignment is a no to yourself. You become overcommitted, overextended, overwhelmed, not because you're weak, but because you've been trained to say yes as a survival strategy. In Boundaries, Dr. Henry Cloud writes that saying no isn't a rejection of others. It's an affirmation of yourself. It's how you protect your energy, your time, your truth. In a world that monetizes attention and equates availability with value, saying no becomes an act of quiet rebellion. It means, I will not trade my peace for your comfort. I will not abandon myself to be liked. The philosopher Kierkegaard once said, once you label me, you negate me. But just as dangerous is when you label yourself with every yes until your identity becomes diluted beyond recognition. Toni Morrison wrote, "The function of freedom is to free someone else. But before you can free anyone, you must first free yourself from the compulsive yes. So the next time you feel the pull to please, to comply, to say yes out of guilt or fear, pause, ask, what would I protect if I said no? What version of myself would I keep alive? Because every yes shapes your life. But so does every no. And sometimes a single no spoken from clarity, love, and self-respect can change the entire direction of your story. What if the life you're seeking is hiding beneath everything you've agreed to do? You're busy. Always. The calendar is full. The to-do list grows faster than you can finish it. You tell yourself it's just a season, that things will calm down soon, that rest will come later, but later keeps moving, and your soul grows quieter beneath the noise of constant doing. We call it ambition. We call it drive. But what if it's just a distraction? What if doing more is what's keeping you from becoming whole? In The Art of Stillness, Pico Iyer reminds us that the deepest journeys are often the ones we take by standing still. We've been taught to measure worth in movement, value in volume, and success in speed. But sacred things, healing, connection, creativity, presence, don't thrive in hurry. They bloom in slowness, in space, in stillness. The sacred act of doing less isn't laziness. It's reclamation of rhythm, of clarity, of self. As the writer Anne Lamott says, almost everything will work again if you unplug it for a few minutes, including you. But we don't just need rest. We need permission to live at a different pace. So look at your life, at all the tasks, the plans, the obligations. Ask, which of these were chosen with love, and which were inherited from fear? What might return to you if you simply did less? Because doing less isn't about quitting. It's about choosing. And sometimes, what feels like slowing down is actually the first step toward finally catching up with your soul. What if the answers you've been seeking were always waiting in your silence? You consult the experts. You search the threads. You scroll through advice, steps, hacks, systems, hoping to find the answer to something only you can know. In the age of information, we've outsourced our intuition. We trust algorithms more than instinct, noise more than nuance, input more than inner truth. But there was a time, before the feed, before the scroll, before the world got so loud, when you could hear your own voice, and that voice hasn't disappeared. It's just been drowned. In Women Who Run with the Wolves, Clarissa Pinkola Estes writes that every human being carries an ancient knowing, a wild, intuitive wisdom that remembers who we are even when the world forgets. But in this distracted age, we trade instinct for immediacy. We mistake movement for direction, and we look outward because we've forgotten how to look within. True wisdom is not loud. It's not optimized. It's not efficient. It's slow, subtle, sacred, and it only speaks when the noise has cleared. As Rumi wrote, there is a voice that doesn't use words. Listen. And that voice, your voice, is still there. So if you feel lost, foggy, overwhelmed by choices and noise and contradiction, Step back. Turn inward. Not for answers that fit the algorithm, but for the wisdom that already lives in your bones. Because not every truth is found in a search bar. Some are found in silence, in breath, in the part of you that's been patiently waiting for you to come home. What if gentleness was the most radical thing you could offer this world? We live in a time that praises the loud, the fast, the relentless. You're told to push harder, to want more, to hustle until you've earned rest. But what if you simply didn't? What if you chose softness in a world that sharpens everyone to survive? What if you moved slower, spoke with intention, rested without guilt, and loved without needing a reason? This is not weakness. This is rebellion. In The Prophet, Khalil Gibran writes, "Tenderness and kindness are not signs of weakness and despair, but manifestations of strength and resolution. Gentleness is strength without violence, power without domination, presence without performance. But gentleness has no metrics, no milestones, no viral moments, and so the world ignores it. Yet it's the gentle people who stitch the torn pieces back together, who hold space in chaos, who remind others how to breathe. As Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron says, compassion is not a relationship between the healer and the wounded. It's a relationship between equals. And that kind of living, slow, present, kind, disrupts a system that survives on disconnection. So if you've ever been called too soft, too quiet, too sensitive, understand this. You are not broken. You are awake. And choosing to live gently, to lead with compassion instead of control, to slow down when the world speeds up, that is no small thing. It is a quiet, daily revolution. And maybe it's exactly the kind the world needs most right now. What if standing still isn't falling behind, but finally arriving? You've been taught to keep moving, to always be doing, to treat stillness as stagnation, as failure. Rest becomes guilt. Pause feels like laziness. The silence in between feels uncomfortable. But what if stillness isn't emptiness? What if it's where truth lives? Because not all progress is visible, and not all movement is forward. Sometimes the greatest clarity comes only when you stop chasing long enough to listen. In Letters to a Young Poet, Rainer Maria Rilke wrote, "Be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves." Stillness gives space for those questions. It lets meaning rise to the surface, unforced, unrushed. But we fear stillness because it confronts us, because in silence there's nowhere to hide from ourselves. Yet it's also where healing begins, where insight forms, where we return to the center we've been circling all along. As Lao Tzu once said, "To the mind that is still, the whole universe surrenders." Stillness isn't the absence of life. It's the point of connection to everything. So if the world tells you to keep moving, but your soul whispers, "Stop," listen. Sit by the window a little longer, walk without headphones, breathe without multitasking. Not to escape, but to return. Because stillness is not the opposite of motion. It's the foundation beneath it. And the moment you stop running, you may realize you were never behind. You are simply being called to come home to yourself.
Who are you when you stop keeping score? We measure everything: steps, calories, hours worked, followers gained, productivity tracked to the second, progress converted into percentages. You start the day already quantifying it. How much can I do? How much did I do? How much am I worth? But life doesn't bloom in spreadsheets. It unfolds in ways no metric can hold. Love isn't linear. Healing isn't efficient. Joy isn't scalable. And yet, we try to weigh the weightless. In Anatomy of Criticism, Northrop Frye writes that the soul resists classification, that the deepest parts of being exist beyond categories, beyond comparison, beyond control. But we live in a culture that mistrusts the immeasurable. If it can't be tracked, it must not be real. And so we overlook the slow, quiet victories. The day you said no, the moment you forgave, the breath you took without rushing, the joy you didn't post. But these too are milestones, just ones no one will ever see. As Wendell Berry once said, the great enemy of freedom is the alignment of political power with wealth. The ally of freedom is the total inadequacy of any human being to take the whole world's measure. The world is too vast, and you are too alive to be reduced to digits. So if you feel behind because your numbers aren't climbing, pause. Ask yourself, what if I no longer needed to prove anything? What if I let my life be felt, not counted? Because the most beautiful parts of your story won't show up in charts. They'll live in the things that made you softer, deeper, more you. And maybe the most sacred kind of life is the one that can't be measured at all. Who are you? When no one is watching, you learn to smile at the right time, to say what's expected, to be productive, likable, polished, even when you're breaking inside. You become a performance, and the world applauds. But the applause feels hollow, because deep down, you know it wasn't for you, only for the version they approved of. And the longer you perform, the harder it becomes to find the real voice beneath the script. But something miraculous happens when you stop. In The Drama of the Gifted Child, Alice Miller writes that many of us learn early to earn love through performance, by suppressing needs, playing roles, pleasing others. But this comes at a cost, our authenticity. We forget how to cry without shame, to say no without guilt, to rest without apology. And in this forgetting, we also forget how to heal. Because healing doesn't happen in performance, it happens in truth. In moments where you can simply say, this is me. No mask, no script, just me. As Brené Brown reminds us, you can't get to courage without walking through vulnerability. You have to show up and be seen. Being seen, truly seen, is the beginning of return. So if you're tired, not just in body but in soul, ask yourself, what part of me have I been performing? And what part is quietly asking to come home? Because the healing begins not when you're perfect, not when you're impressive, but when you stop pretending. When you drop the act and finally meet yourself, unfiltered. Because the love you've been chasing might only find you once you finally stop performing long enough to let it in. What if your obsession with becoming is keeping you from being? You've heard it your whole life. You have so much potential, as if you're a project, a future, a promise not yet fulfilled. And so you strive, you push, you try to live up to this shadow version of yourself, the better, more successful, more impressive you that always seems just out of reach. But potential can become a prison, a moving target that whispers, you're not there yet. Even when there was never clearly defined. In The Courage to Be, theologian Paul Tillich speaks to the anxiety of becoming, the never-ending pressure to evolve, grow, succeed. And yet, he argues, courage is not found in self-improvement. It's found in self-acceptance, in the willingness to say I am, not I will be, not I should be, but simply I am. Because peace doesn't come from chasing what you could be. It comes from loving who you already are. As poet David Whyte once said, sometimes the truth depends on a walk around the lake, not on a breakthrough, not on a promotion, but on a pause, a return to presence. So if you're tired of trying to live up to your potential, maybe it's time to stop. Not because you've given up, but because you've finally come home, to a self that doesn't need to be proven, to a life that doesn't need to be maximized, to a soul that doesn't need to be constantly reaching, because you were never meant to be a benchmark. You were meant to be you, and when you let go of potential, you make space for peace.
Who are you? When no one is clapping, you post, you share, You speak hoping someone hears. You succeed hoping someone sees. And somewhere along the way, you begin to live like you're always on stage. Even in private moments, there's a shadow watching, an imaginary audience, judging, admiring, comparing, reacting. It's subtle, but constant, and it makes your life less lived and more performed. In the presentation of self in everyday life, sociologist Irving Goffman wrote that much of what we do is shaped by how we expect to be perceived. But when every moment becomes a scene, we lose our intimacy with reality, with ourselves. Living without an audience doesn't mean disappearing. It means returning to the part of you that doesn't need applause to feel valid, that doesn't need to be watched to feel real. As Thomas Merton once said, we are not at peace with others because we are not at peace with ourselves. And we are not at peace with ourselves because we are not at peace with God and whatever God means to you. Stillness, truth, love, self. It lives not in the spotlight, but in the quiet space where no one else is looking. So ask yourself, when was the last time you did something beautiful and told no one? When was the last time you laughed, cried, created, or healed, and didn't document it? The power of living without an audience isn't about hiding. It's about reclaiming the part of your life that belongs to no one but you. Because when you no longer perform, you finally begin to live. What, if not finishing, was sometimes the most honest thing you could do? We are taught to finish, to follow through, to tie up every loose end, to turn every beginning into a conclusion. But life isn't always neat. Not every path leads somewhere. Not every relationship resolves. Not every chapter ends with closure. And maybe that's okay, because the pressure to complete, to wrap things up, to fix, to prove, can become its own kind of cage. And freedom might look like leaving some pages open. In Fragments of a Journal, the writer Eugene Ionesco reflected on the beauty of what remains unfinished, the way ambiguity, silence, and imperfection hold a deeper kind of truth. He wrote, "Only the unfinished can still grow. When we insist on finishing everything, we risk forcing what was never meant to be forced. We polish what was meant to be raw. We stay too long in what was meant to be a moment. But letting go before it's perfect, before it's clear, before it's done, can be a kind of liberation. As poet Rainer Maria Rilke once said, be patient toward all that is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves, because not all questions want to be answered. Some just want to be held. So if you're feeling the weight of unfinished things, the project left behind, the words never said, the dream that drifted, breathe. Some things are sacred because they're incomplete. Some doors are meant to stay ajar. Some stories don't need an ending to be meaningful, because the most honest life isn't always finished, but it's always true. And sometimes you don't need to close the loop. You just need to let it rest, right where it is. What if your worth had nothing to do with what you got done today? You didn't check the boxes. You didn't answer the emails. You didn't accomplish much, at least not in the ways you're used to measuring. And yet, you breathed. You felt. You noticed something beautiful. You rested. But then comes the guilt, the itch to explain, to justify your stillness. Because in this world, to be unproductive is to be seen as lazy, broken, falling behind. But what if unproductivity isn't the absence of value, but the return to it? In How to Do Nothing, Jenny Odell writes that stepping outside the productivity machine is not giving up, but a radical act of reclamation. She reminds us that attention is not just a resource to be monetized, but a sacred part of being alive. And when you're always doing, you stop noticing. You stop being. But when you allow yourself to do nothing, you begin to see again, to hear, to feel, to become human again. As John Lennon once said, time you enjoy wasting was not wasted, because not every moment needs a metric. Some are meant to simply be experienced. So, if you spent the day resting, wandering, staring out the window, you didn't fail. You returned to rhythm, to breath, to the parts of you that don't exist for profit. Productivity is not your purpose. Your value isn't in output. You are not a task list. You are allowed to be here, without proving anything. And sometimes, the most beautiful days are the ones where nothing gets done, except your soul coming quietly back to life. What if protecting your peace didn't require building walls? You've been told to set boundaries, to draw the line, to be firm, to say no with confidence and strength. And sometimes, that's true. Sometimes the line must be clear. But not all boundaries need to be loud. Not all protection needs to be hard. There is power in the gentle, in the quiet no, in the slow turning away from what drains you. Soft boundaries don't shut people out. They let you stay in your center, in your clarity, in your calm, in radical acceptance. Tara Brach writes about the practice of being firm and kind, of saying yes to yourself, without needing to push others away. Because true boundaries aren't about defense. They're about alignment. They come from self-respect, not fear. From care, not control. You don't need to be harsh to be whole. You just need to know what keeps you grounded and gently protect it. As Bell Hooks once said, saying no can be the ultimate self-care, especially when that no is whispered from a place of deep inner knowing. So, if you find yourself exhausted, overcommitted, resentful, you don't need to fight. You don't need to rage. You just need to soften and return to the part of you that knows what feels safe, what feels loving, what feels true. And then quietly, consistently, build your life around that knowing. Because the most powerful boundaries are the ones that hold you without having to harden you. What if everything you're truly craving lives on the other side of slowing down? The world moves fast. News cycles, notifications, deliveries, decisions. You're expected to keep up, to react quickly, respond instantly, decide immediately. But depth doesn't live in speed. Connection doesn't bloom under pressure. Wisdom doesn't rush to arrive. Slowness isn't inefficiency. It's invitation. An invitation to feel what you've been numbing, to notice what you've been ignoring, to hear what your soul has been whispering beneath all the noise. In Praise of Slowness, Carl Honore writes that slowness is not about doing less. It's about doing things with more intention, because some truths only emerge when you stop outrunning them. A meaningful conversation, a long, wandering walk, the breath you actually pay attention to. These aren't distractions. They're doorways. Doorways into a life with more texture, more soul, more depth. As philosopher Søren Kierkegaard said, life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. And understanding, true understanding, only arrives when we slow down enough to feel our way through. So, if the days feel thin, if connection feels shallow, if you're skimming the surface of your own life, pause, not to escape, but to return. Because slowness isn't falling behind. It's falling into something deeper, into presence, into meaning, into the part of life that doesn't shout, but patiently waits for you to slow down enough to hear it. What if the life you've been taught to outgrow is the one that holds your deepest joy? You're told to be exceptional, to stand out, to leave a legacy, to make your mark, and anything less feels like failure. But in chasing greatness, you may overlook the quiet miracles, the cup of coffee in morning light, the laughter that comes from nothing in particular, the way someone remembers your name without needing anything from you. These are not viral. They are not strategic. They are ordinary, and they are sacred. In The Hidden Life of Ordinary Things, philosopher Michael Foley explores how modern culture has conditioned us to undervalue the simple, the quiet, the everyday. But often, it's in the mundane that life becomes most honest, most human. Because joy doesn't always erupt. Sometimes it just gently arrives. You don't need to be extraordinary to feel deep purpose. You just need to be present to the life you're already living. As writer Courtney E. Martin said, "We are so obsessed with being somebody that we lose the magic of just being. And being is enough." So if your life feels small, if your days feel unremarkable, if no one is clapping, breathe. Because your value was never in the applause. It was in the quiet way you showed up. For yourself, for others, for the moments that don't make headlines, but hold your whole heart. You don't need to be extraordinary. You just need to be real. And in that, there is a joy so quiet, it almost feels like home. What if what you're chasing was never meant to be caught? You chase success, recognition, security, love. You run toward approval, perfection, meaning. And every time you get close, the target moves, and you run again. The world tells you it's purpose. But maybe it's exile, because the more you chase, the further you drift from the ground beneath your feet. And you forget that what you truly long for isn't out there. It's belonging, not to an image, not to a title, but to yourself. In The Gifts of Imperfection, Brené Brown reminds us that belonging doesn't come from fitting in. It comes from the courage to be fully seen. And belonging doesn't ask you to chase. It asks you to come home, to the body you've abandoned in pursuit, to the soul you silenced to be accepted, to the truth you buried beneath ambition. The chase ends when you stop asking, "Am I enough for them?" and begin asking, "Am I true to me?" As David Whyte writes, "To be human is to become visible while carrying what is hidden as a gift to others." That's belonging, not performance, but presence. So if you're tired, not from movement, but from meaningless movement, let this be the turning point, the end of the chase, the moment you stop running towards something you were never missing. Because belonging doesn't begin when you arrive at some perfect destination. It begins when you return to the quiet knowing that you were already whole, already home, already enough. What if the path you're meant to walk doesn't look like anyone else's? You watch others move quickly, climbing ladders, building brands, collecting milestones. You wonder if you're behind, if you're doing it wrong, if your rhythm is offbeat, your choice is too strange. But what if your difference isn't a mistake, but a signal? A signal that your path was never meant to follow the crowd, because what's sacred is often what's misunderstood. In The Way of Integrity, Martha Beck writes that real freedom comes when we stop betraying ourselves to fit into maps that were never made for us. She reminds us that alignment is found not in comparison, but in truth. You don't need to build the biggest life. You need to build the one that feels like yours. That might mean slower mornings, a smaller home, a quieter career, a deeper presence. It may look like failure to others, but to your soul, it will feel like relief. As Clarissa Pinkola Estes wrote, if you have a deep scar, that is a door. If you have an old story, that is a door. If you yearn for a deeper life, a full life, that is a door. Your difference is not a detour, it's the doorway. So if you feel like you don't quite fit, good. You weren't made to conform. You were made to remember. And the moment you stop trying to live a life that looks good and start living one that feels right, that's when the sacred begins. Not in perfection, not in applause, but in the quiet, powerful act of doing it your way. Because different might be the most divine path of all. Who might you become if you stop needing to be liked? You've learned to read the room, to say what they want to hear, to shrink where you're too bright, to decorate your truth with silence. Because approval is addictive. It feels like love. It feels like safety. But it's not. It's a mirror with no reflection, just a blur of who others need you to be. And living for approval is a life of constant editing, a slow erasure of self. In The Four Agreements, Don Miguel Ruiz speaks to the freedom that comes when you stop taking things personally, when you no longer hand your worth to other people's preferences. Approval is fickle. It shifts with trends, moods, insecurities. But your truth? That's steady. That's sacred. You weren't born to be digestible. You were born to be whole. And sometimes, becoming whole means becoming less likable to those who only loved your performance. As Jim Carrey once said, your need for acceptance can make you invisible in this world. And approval rarely asks for your soul. It asks for your silence. So if you're tired of being agreeable, palatable, marketable, nice, you're not broken. You're awakening. You're feeling the quiet end of a life lived in other people's eyes. And as that life ends, a new one begins. One where your truth doesn't need applause, where your love isn't conditional, where your voice no longer waits for permission. Because you were never meant to be tolerated. You are meant to be free. What if peace isn't something you chase, but something that arrives when you finally release? You've held on to the version of yourself others needed, to the stories that kept you safe, to the expectations that never truly fit. Letting go felt dangerous. It always does. Because we mistake release for failure. We confuse surrender with giving up. But what if letting go isn't a collapse, but a return? A return to breath, to lightness, to self. And what follows is the first true exhale in years. In The Untethered Soul, Michael A. Singer speaks of the sacred freedom that comes when we no longer grip life so tightly. He writes that pain only persists when we refuse to let go, when we hold it in place with our fear of the unknown. But when we finally release, what breaks is not us, but the illusion that we had to hold it all, prove it all, be it all. Letting go doesn't mean losing. It means trusting that you are carried, even without control. As Mary Oliver wrote, to live in this world, you must be able to do three things: to love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it, and when the time comes to let it go, to let it go. So if you feel the urge to release the relationship, the identity, the story, the dream that no longer holds you, don't resist it. Breathe with it. You are not unraveling. You are making space. And what follows that kind of release isn't emptiness. It's clarity. And in that clarity, you may hear something soft, but certain. Welcome back. What if the most powerful truth is the one that doesn't need to be spoken? You've been told to speak up, to explain, to prove, to fill every silence with certainty. But not all truths arrive with sound. Some come wrapped in stillness. Silence isn't absence. It's presence without noise. And it often holds more meaning than the most carefully chosen words. We fear silence because it leaves us exposed. Because in silence, there is no performance, only presence. But sometimes, that's where the real conversation begins. In silence, the power of quiet in a world full of noise. Thich Nhat Hanh reminds us that true silence is not the absence of sound, but the presence of peace. It's the space where insight forms, where emotions settle, where the soul finally gets a word in. Silence teaches, it clarifies, it restores. And in a culture that equates volume with value, silence becomes an act of courage, a quiet declaration. I don't need to be loud to be real. I don't need to explain to be true. As Rumi wrote, there is a voice that doesn't use words. Listen, that voice is your knowing, your compass, your calm. So if you find yourself surrounded by noise, in the world, in your mind, in your heart, step into the quiet. Let it wash over you. Let it hold what words cannot, because not every truth must be shouted. Some are best honored in stillness, and in that stillness, you may discover a voice, not made of sound, but of certainty, a voice that says, this is enough. You are enough. Even here, even in silence. What if the peace you're craving only comes when you stop trying to figure it all out? You want answers. You want to be certain. You want to know what's coming, what it means, what to do next. You search, overthink, analyze, believing clarity is around the next mental corner. But some things aren't puzzles to solve. They're mysteries to live. And needing to know can become its own kind of prison. Because not knowing is where trust begins. In The Wisdom of Insecurity, Alan Watts writes that our obsession with certainty is what causes us the most suffering. He says that life is inherently uncertain, and the more we try to control it, the more we lose our ability to experience it. Freedom, he says, comes not from knowing what's ahead, but from learning to be fully here, without demanding answers. Because the need to know often keeps us from the very life we're trying so hard to prepare for. As the mystic poet Rainer Maria Rilke wrote, try to love the questions themselves and live them now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer. So if you're spiraling in the unknown, the relationship that has no name, the season without direction, the dream without a plan, breathe. You don't need to know yet. You don't need to name it yet. There is freedom in surrendering the urge to solve everything. There is life in the pause between questions and answers. And maybe the truth will not arrive as an answer at all, but as a quiet unfolding of a life fully lived, even in the beautiful unknown. What if the life you want isn't waiting in more, but quietly resting in less? More goals, more growth, more improvement, more tools, more habits, more productivity, and still something feels missing. Because more was never the medicine. It was the noise. And somewhere along the way, you began to believe that a full life meant a full schedule, a full room, a full cart. But fullness isn't about quantity. It's about clarity. And sometimes clarity arrives when you finally begin to let things go. In Essentialism, Greg McKeown writes that the disciplined pursuit of less is not a loss, but a reclaiming of meaning. Because when everything matters, nothing truly does. And the more you choose, the more you dilute your energy, your presence, your peace. Choosing less isn't about deprivation. It's about intention. It's learning to say, this matters, and that can go. As Leonardo da Vinci said, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. In a world obsessed with accumulation, simplicity is strength. So if your mind feels cluttered, your days rushed, your spirit scattered, pause and ask, what is truly essential? What would remain if I stopped trying to hold it all? Because peace doesn't always come from addition. Sometimes it's found in subtraction, not in having everything, but in no longer needing to. And maybe the quietest kind of abundance is learning to live deeply with just what fits in your two open hands. What if your softness was never your weakness, but the strongest part of you? The world moves fast. It rewards the sharp. It celebrates the bold. It tells you to toughen up, grow thicker skin, protect yourself. And maybe you have. Maybe you've armored up, built walls around the parts of you that once felt everything too deeply, because feeling too much, in a world that values control, can feel like a burden. But what if softness wasn't a flaw, but a form of quiet resistance? In All About Love, Bell Hooks writes that love cannot exist without vulnerability, without the willingness to stay open, in a world that often demands we close, to remain soft. In the face of pain, cruelty, or indifference, is not weakness. It's courage, because it takes strength to still care, to still hope, to still offer gentleness. When harshness would be easier, a soft heart doesn't mean fragile. It means alive. It means refusing to let the world make you cold. As Naira Wahid once wrote, be softer with you. You are a breathing thing, a memory to someone, a home to a life. So if you feel things deeply, if you cry easily, if you love without armor, don't shrink. That is not your weakness. That is your edge. The world may not always honor softness, but it needs it. Because your open heart is not here to compete, it's here to connect. And in a time of noise and numbness, to feel deeply is the most radical kind of strength. What if the most powerful version of you isn't who you're becoming, but who you already are? You strive, you grow, you chase your best self. You read the books, set the goals, build the habits. You're always improving, always becoming. But sometimes, in all the becoming, you forget how to be. You begin to live in a future version of yourself and abandon the one that's already breathing, feeling worthy. Becoming is beautiful, but not if it teaches you that who you are right now isn't enough. In The Power of Now, Eckhart Tolle reminds us that peace is never found in the next thing. It lives here, in the now, in the stillness between striving. When we are constantly becoming, we are often avoiding the discomfort of simply being, of sitting with ourselves, without needing to fix or improve or upgrade. But being is where presence lives, and presence is where life actually happens. As poet and philosopher John O'Donohue wrote, "We are so busy managing our lives for productivity and performance that we lose the grace and rhythm of simply being." And grace doesn't need achievement. It just asks for attention. So if you're tired of trying to be better, if the self-help never ends, if growth starts to feel like pressure, pause. You don't need to become more to be enough. There is power in sitting quietly with yourself and saying, "Even now, I belong. Even here, I am whole." Because becoming is endless, but being is where peace begins. What if everything you've been searching for has been within you all along? You looked outside, to the mentors, the milestones, the maps. You believed healing lived in a future version of you. Stronger, wiser, more enlightened. So you journeyed. You transformed. You let go, moved on, dug deep. But in the quiet moments, when the striving stops, a gentle truth emerges. You were never broken. You were never missing pieces. You were simply far from yourself. In coming home to yourself, Thich Nhat Hanh writes that we often live as if we are exiled from our own presence. We forget that we already carry the calm, the clarity, the wholeness we long for. Wholeness is not something you earn. It's something you remember. And the return isn't to a better version of you. It's to the version that was whole, before the world told you otherwise. As poet Nair Wahid said, "And I said to my body softly, 'I want to be your friend.' It took a long breath and replied, 'I've been waiting my whole life for this.' So if you're still searching for purpose, for peace, for proof that you're enough, pause. You may not need to find anything. You may only need to return to the child who wondered, to the soul that felt, to the self you abandoned in the pursuit of worth. Because wholeness isn't out there. It's not after the next breakthrough. It's here, now, in this breath, in this moment, in you. You've always been the destination. Welcome back. What wasn't what you became, but that you're here at all? You've spent your life reaching for meaning, for success, for healing, for proof that your existence matters. But maybe the most sacred truth has nothing to do with your achievements. Maybe the miracle is that you breathe, that your heart keeps beating, even when you forget to be grateful for it. That you woke up today, despite the pain, despite the weight, despite everything you thought would break you. And still, you're here, in the Book of Delights. Ross Gay writes that joy isn't always loud. Sometimes it's hidden in the smallest cracks of ordinary life. A breeze through the window, a glance from a stranger, the softness of being held without needing to be fixed. He reminds us, you don't need a reason to be here. Your presence is the reason. And once you stop measuring your worth by your output, you begin to witness the quiet miracle that you've been living all along. As Mary Oliver asked, doesn't everything die at last, and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? So if life feels heavy, if your purpose feels unclear, if you're still waiting to be enough, stop. Not because you've failed, but because maybe you've been chasing what was already here. You, right now, unfinished, imperfect, ordinary, but alive. And that aliveness, that breath, that's the miracle. Not for what it produces, not for what it earns, but simply because it is. What if real strength isn't in how far you go, but in your willingness to stay? We're taught to run from discomfort, from uncertainty, from the ache of being known too deeply. We distract, we scroll, we leave. We say, I just need something new. But sometimes, you don't need a new beginning. You need to stay long enough to finish the conversation you keep having with yourself. Staying doesn't mean settling. It means facing. It means choosing presence over escape. In When Things Fall Apart, Pema Chodron writes that the greatest spiritual growth often begins in the moment we choose not to run, when we turn toward what hurts, toward the silence, toward the unresolved. She calls it leaning into the sharp points, because staying, truly staying, asks you to be with life as it is, not as you want it to be, not as you thought it would go, but right here, right now. As Rainer Maria Rilke once wrote, let everything happen to you, beauty and terror. Just keep going. No feeling is final, and no truth can be fully met if you're always halfway out the door. So if your heart is heavy, if a part of you wants to flee from the conversation, from the discomfort, from yourself, pause. What if this moment is not a wall, but a threshold? And the act of staying, of breathing through it, isn't weakness, but the first step towards something deeper. Because sometimes, the most courageous thing you can do is stay seated at your own soul's table, when every part of you wants to run. What if starting over wasn't a failure, but a sacred act of remembering? You've tried, you've built, you've lost, you've hurt, and maybe you've let yourself believe that starting again means going backwards. But it doesn't. Starting again isn't a reset, it's a return, a quiet step back toward the life that still wants you. We think of grace as something offered to us, but sometimes it's something we must offer ourselves. In Falling Upward, Richard Rohr reminds us that life isn't a straight line of progress, but a spiral, and that what feels like returning to the beginning is often entering a deeper layer of truth. When we begin again, we're not the same. We bring the ache, the lessons, the tenderness. We begin wiser, softer, more real. And that kind of beginning, the kind that comes after falling, is the most courageous kind of all. As Bo Taplin wrote, "Start over, my darling. Be brave enough to find the life you want, and courageous enough to chase it. Then start over and love yourself the way you were always meant to." So if you find yourself here again, at the edge of change, with trembling hands and a tired heart, know this: you are not broken. You are being called to begin again, not because you failed, but because your story is still unfolding, because your soul still believes in something more. There is no shame in starting over, only grace. And maybe this time, you're not starting from scratch. You're starting from experience, from wisdom, from truth. And that is enough. What if your scars aren't what broke you, but what built you? You rarely talk about it. What you've endured, what you kept hidden, what you carried in silence, while the world asked you to keep smiling. Survival doesn't always look like triumph. Sometimes it looks like barely making it. Sometimes it looks like getting out of bed when your heart was too heavy to lift. And still, you're here. Not polished, not untouched, but real and resilient. In Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl wrote that suffering ceases to be suffering the moment it finds meaning. But meaning doesn't mean explanation. It means honoring what shaped you. It means understanding that your survival is not a footnote. It's the story. And the cracks in you aren't signs of weakness. They're where the light came in. They are the proof. You felt it all, and you stayed anyway. As Haruki Murakami wrote, "And once the storm is over, you won't remember how you made it through, how you managed to survive. You won't even be sure, in fact, that the storm is really over. But one thing is certain. When you come out of the storm, you won't be the same person who walked in." So, if you feel like you're still piecing yourself together, take heart. Because the fact that you are still here, still breathing, still choosing love, when you had every reason not to, that is beautiful. Your survival is not shameful. It's sacred. And maybe now, you don't have to carry it as armor anymore. Maybe now, you can carry it as proof that you are strong, that you are soft, that you are still becoming, and that everything you've survived was not in vain.
What if the brightest light you carry was never meant to be visible? We're taught to shine, to stand out, to make our mark, to be noticed, applauded, remembered. But there is another kind of light, a quieter one, a light that doesn't chase attention, because it doesn't need to. It's the light in how you stay kind, even when life wasn't. The light in how you hold space for others, even while healing yourself. It doesn't flash, it doesn't shout, but it illuminates everything it touches. In Let Your Life Speak, Parker J. Palmer writes that your true self is less like a spotlight and more like a soul lantern, a glow that moves with you regardless of who sees it. This is the light that shines in small, hidden moments. When you forgive quietly, when you choose compassion over being right, when you listen deeply without needing to respond. The world may never notice, but your presence still changes it. As Hafiz once wrote, "I wish I could show you when you are lonely or in darkness, the astonishing light of your own being." That light doesn't burn to be seen. It burns to remind you, you are already enough. So if your work goes unnoticed, if your care is quiet, if your truth is soft, know this: not all light stands on stage. Some of it walks through the world unseen, healing, softening, loving. And that light matters. Yours matters. You don't need to prove it. You only need to keep letting it glow. Because sometimes the light that doesn't need to be seen is the one that never goes out. What if the most powerful love was the kind that doesn't ask to be noticed? We're taught to chase fireworks, to to want passion that roars, love that posts, devotion that's easy to recognize from across the room. But real love, the kind that heals, the kind that lasts, is often quiet. It brings you tea when you didn't ask. It remembers the story you told 6 months ago. It listens, not to reply, but to hold you. It doesn't need to be loud because it isn't performing. It's simply there. In The Road Less Traveled, M. Scott Peck describes love not as a feeling, but as a commitment to someone's spiritual growth. This kind of love doesn't always feel grand. Sometimes it feels like showing up when it's inconvenient. Sometimes it feels like silence or space or just sitting beside someone in their pain without trying to fix them. It doesn't rush, it doesn't need credit, it doesn't wear a label, but it's real. As Antoine de Saint-Exupéry wrote in The Little Prince, what is essential is invisible to the eye. The most important love is often the hardest to prove because it asks for nothing but presence. So if you've been taught that love must be loud to be true, pause. Notice the people who stay, who check in, who love you in quiet ways that don't sparkle on the surface but hold you when everything else falls away. And notice the love you offer when no one is watching. That kind of love, the quiet kind, changes lives, not with noise, but with truth. What if your most courageous act was choosing a life that makes sense to your soul, even if it doesn't impress anyone else? You've done the things, collected the degrees, followed the path, built the resume, the home, the image. On the outside it looks good, but inside something aches. Because somewhere along the way you stopped asking, does this feel like me? And started asking, will this make sense to them? And the deeper truth? A life that only looks good will slowly start to feel hollow. In The Way of Integrity, Martha Beck writes that living out of alignment with your truth can create a kind of slow spiritual pain, the ache of wearing a life that doesn't fit. Integrity, she reminds us, isn't about morality, it's about wholeness. Living in a way where your thoughts, values, and actions are in harmony. And wholeness doesn't always photograph well. It might look simpler, quieter, less ambitious on the surface. But inside, it feels like peace. As Howard Thurman once said, don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive, and go do it. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. So if you're questioning everything, the job, the plan, the version of success you were handed, you're not lost. You're waking up. And choosing a life that feels right over one that merely looks right, that is bravery. Not everyone will understand, but your soul will. And maybe that's where real freedom begins, in the quiet, trembling choice to build a life that makes you come alive, whether or not it ever fits in a box. What if your next level of peace comes not from being understood, but from letting go of the need to be? You explain, you clarify, you defend your heart, your choices, your past. You want to be seen clearly, to be known fully, to be gotten. But no matter how carefully you speak, some people will still misunderstand. They'll reduce you, judge you, twist your story, and that hurts. Until it doesn't. Until you realize that peace has nothing to do with their perception, and everything to do with your own self-trust. In The Gifts of Imperfection, Brené Brown writes that authenticity is a daily practice of letting go. Letting go of who you think you're supposed to be, and embracing who you actually are. That includes letting go of how others see you. Because the more time you spend managing perception, the less time you have for living your truth. You don't owe the world an explanation for your healing, your timing, or your becoming. Some people may get a version of you that isn't true, and that's okay. As Young Pueblo once wrote, your growth may not be visible to them, but it is deeply felt by you, and that is more than enough. So if someone misreads you, if they misunderstand your silence, your softness, your distance, your light, breathe. You don't need to chase their clarity. You know who you are, and you're still becoming. That's between you and the life you're building, not between you and their opinion. Because peace doesn't come from being understood by everyone. It comes from being at home in yourself, even when no one else gets it. And letting them be wrong about you? That's not defeat. It's liberation. What if true strength wasn't in how hard you push, but in how softly you can stand still? You've tried to prove it, that you're capable, that you're good enough, that your past doesn't define you, that you deserve to be here. And maybe, for a while, that fuel worked. It got you moving, it kept you climbing. But proving is exhausting, because the need to prove is built on the belief that something is still missing. But what if there's nothing left to prove? What if your worth is not on trial? In Radical Acceptance, Tara Brach writes that our suffering often comes from the trance of unworthiness, the quiet, constant belief that we must earn our right to exist. But when you wake up from that trance, something powerful happens. You stop performing. You stop defending. You simply begin to be. And in that stillness, you become unshakable. Not because you've conquered the world, but because you've finally made peace with yourself. As Toni Morrison once said, you are not the work you do. You are the person you are. And the person you are doesn't need an audience to be real. So if you're tired of proving to your parents, your partner, your past, the world, it might be time to stop. Not because you've given up, but because you've woken up. You're not here to compete. You're not here to convince. You're here to live, fully, honestly, gently. And the moment you realize that you don't have to prove a thing is the moment you finally start living from a place of quiet, grounded power. The kind of power that doesn't need to be loud, because it's already whole. What waits for you after all the effort, the proving, the pursuit have finally gone quiet? You've climbed, you've hustled, you've carried dreams like burdens, chasing a version of life that always felt one step ahead. And maybe you've reached some of it, the title, the status, the enough. But then comes the quiet, the unexpected question, now what? We're taught how to strive, how to chase, how to stretch, but almost no one teaches us how to stop, how to let the soul land where the body already is. In The Sabbath, Abraham Joshua Heschel speaks of sacred time, not to be filled, but to be honored. He writes that striving belongs to the weekdays, but stillness belongs to the soul. And at some point we must shift from becoming to simply being present. Because there is a peace that can only be felt when you've laid your tools down. When you no longer define yourself by the ground you cover, but by the ground you stand on. As Pico Iyer wrote, "In an age of speed, I began to think nothing could be more invigorating than going slow. In an age of distraction, nothing could feel more luxurious than paying attention. And in an age of constant movement, nothing is more urgent than sitting still." So if you've done the work, chased the dreams, and you're still not sure what comes next, maybe it's this: stillness. Not as a pause before the next goal, not as a temporary retreat, but as the destination itself, the place where you no longer need to strive because you've remembered what it feels like to simply be here, to breathe, to belong, to be. And in that stillness, life begins again, not as something to chase, but as something to finally receive. What if the life you're meant to live doesn't need permission, just space? You've waited for clarity, for approval, for the right time. You've asked silently or aloud, is it okay to want this? Am I allowed to change? Will they understand if I grow? But life, real, soul-deep life, doesn't wait for permission. It grows in the cracks. It softens what was rigid. It blooms quietly, even in places that told it not to. You don't need to be ready. You just need to be willing. In Emergent Strategy, Adrienne Marie Brown writes that change is fractal, that transformation often happens in the small, unseen spaces before it becomes something visible. The most authentic growth isn't orchestrated. It's organic, subtle, messy. It defies systems. It confuses those who need labels. It doesn't need an audience, because it isn't a performance. It's a becoming. As Rumi wrote, try not to resist the changes that come your way. Instead, let life live through you. Because life doesn't ask for a resume before it begins again. It simply moves, if you let it. So if something in you is stirring, a desire, a shift, a quiet rebellion, listen. You don't need permission to grow. You don't need consensus to evolve. You don't need anyone else's understanding to come alive. Because the life that's meant for you will not arrive with fanfare. It will rise, slowly, gently, patiently, beneath the surface of everything that told you to stay the same. And one day, without asking, it will begin to bloom, right where you are.
What if not knowing why is exactly what makes this moment sacred? You're changing, but you can't explain it. You're quieter, or restless, or pulled towards something you can't quite name. And when people ask you what's going on, you struggle to put it into words because you don't fully know either. We've been taught to label everything, to define, justify, quantify, but not all seasons come with clarity. Some arrive only with feeling, some are sacred, precisely because they refuse to be understood. In When the Heart Waits, Sue Monk Kidd writes about the spiritual cocoon, a time when everything appears still on the outside, but transformation is unfolding within. She calls it holy waiting, a space not of answers, but of deep becoming, and in our rush to name the season, we often miss the wisdom it holds. You don't need to explain this moment, you only need to honor it. Even confusion can be a form of clarity, because it means something new is trying to emerge. As the poet Morgan Harper Nichols wrote, "You are not behind, you are in a season of building what cannot be seen, and just because it, invisible, doesn't mean it isn't real." So if you find yourself in a strange space, not who you were, not yet who you're becoming, breathe. Don't rush to define it. Don't shrink it with certainty. Instead, let it be what it is, sacred in between, a quiet unfolding, a whisper of something more. Because the most meaningful seasons are not always the loudest. They're the ones that teach you to trust yourself, even when you have no words to explain why. What if you're not late, just living a life that refuses to be rushed? There was a plan once, a map, a timeline for how things were supposed to go. By now you thought you'd be further, wiser, settled, whole, but the timeline unraveled, the goals moved. The path bent in ways no one told you it might, and for a while you thought that meant you'd failed. But what if the timeline itself was never the truth? What if the soul has its own clock? In Late Bloomers, Rich Karlgaard reminds us that growth isn't linear, that some of the most deeply rooted lives take the longest to unfold. He writes that our obsession with early achievement blinds us to the beauty of becoming in our own time, because life isn't a race, and you are not behind. You are simply blooming on a schedule that belongs to no one but you, and when you finally let go of the pressure to be on time, truth begins to rise, unforced, unfiltered, undeniable. As Carol Strayed once said, you don't have a right to the cards you believe you should have been dealt. You have an obligation to play the hell out of the ones you're holding, and sometimes that means honoring the pace you didn't choose, but deeply need. So if you're wondering when it will happen, the clarity, the calling, the rival, maybe it already is. Not all arrivals look like finish lines. Some look like patience, like staying when it's easier to run, like blooming slowly beneath soil no one else can see, because the truth was never tied to a clock. It was waiting for the moment you finally stopped watching the hands and started listening to your heart. And now you're right on time. What if your greatest success was something only you would ever fully understand? Success has a look, a number, a sound. It's often loud, tallied in metrics, milestones, and the visible climb. But what if your success isn't loud at all? What if your proudest achievement is waking up without dread, loathing someone without fear, choosing peace when revenge was easier? What if you're already successful because you survived what tried to silence you and kept your heart soft anyway? In the top 5 regrets of the dying, Bronnie Ware found that the most common regret was not living a life true to oneself, but one shaped by what others expected. and yet we chase their definition of success, hoping it will bring us home to ourselves. But real success isn't earned, it's reclaimed. It's saying no when you used to say yes. It's resting without guilt. It's doing the thing that makes no sense to others, but saves your soul. That kind of success is quiet, private, profound. As Ralph Waldo Emerson said, to know even one life has breathed easier because you have lived. This is to have succeeded, and sometimes the life that breathes easier is your own. So if the world doesn't see it, if no one claps, if there are no trophies, but you feel a little more whole, a little more honest, a little more alive, then let that be enough. Because success doesn't always look like celebration. Sometimes it looks like soft mornings, clean boundaries, a calm heart, and sometimes it looks like simply becoming the person you once prayed you'd have the strength to be. What if the life you long for isn't waiting ahead of you but gently calling you back? You've wandered, you've tried on versions of yourself that pleased others, that felt impressive, that fit the moment, but not your soul. And now, without fanfare, you feel it, a pull, a nudge, a whisper beneath the noise. Come home, not to the past, but to the part of you that never stopped hoping you'd return. In The Hero with a Thousand Faces, Joseph Campbell writes that every true journey is a circle, and that the end of the quest is not the discovery of something new, but the return to self, transformed. You are not the same person who left, but now you're ready to come back, to the dreams you buried, to the rhythm that suits you, to the truth you no longer need to defend. You don't need to start over, you need to come back differently, wiser, softer, truer. As poet Derek Walcott wrote, the time will come when, with elation, you will greet yourself arriving at your own door, in your own mirror, and each will smile at the other's welcome. So if you feel the pull back to slowness, to meaning, to something more real, follow it, not because your old life was wrong, but because your true life has been waiting, and it doesn't need perfection. It only needs your presence, because what we call returning isn't going backwards. It's choosing finally to walk forward in the direction of yourself. What if this season of smallness is not a setback but a sanctuary? Not much is happening, you're not launching, not leveling up, not expanding, and a part of you whispers, shouldn't I be doing more? But what if this quiet season isn't a failure to thrive, but a chance to breathe? To root, to rest, to repair what striving never healed. Growth doesn't always mean stretching wide. Sometimes it means deepening into the life already here. In Wintering, Catherine May writes that there are seasons of life that feel like pause, retreat, even disappearance. But these seasons are not empty. They are essential. She says, doing those deeply unfashionable things, resting, retreating, repairing may be some of the most radical acts of all. Letting life be small, gentle, unseen, is an act of grace, because only in stillness can you hear what's next, and only in simplicity can you feel what's true. As Clarissa Pinkola Est reminds us, do not lose heart. We were made for these times, and sometimes these times look like quietly rebuilding a foundation no one else can see. So if your life feels small, narrowed down to soft routines, quiet days, unfinished things, breathe. This season is not meaningless. It is not wasted. It is the soil beneath something sacred. You are allowed to go quiet, to stay close to home, to love the little things, to make peace with enough, because sometimes the most powerful life is the one that's learning to bloom in small, steady ways beneath the surface, where all real transformation begins. What if your deepest clarity comes not from solving the problem, but from surrendering to the moment? You've tried to fix it, the doubt, the ache, the relationships, the pace of your life. You've rearranged the pieces again and again, hoping they'll finally fit. And maybe you've thought, if I can just figure it out, I'll feel better. But what if the truth isn't something to solve, but something to sit with? Because not everything broken is meant to be fixed, and not every discomfort needs an answer. Some of it just needs your presence. In the things you can see only when you slow down, Hemin Sunim writes that, sometimes, trying too hard to fix what feels off only pulls us further from peace. He invites us instead to soften, to observe, to trust that wisdom often rises, not from control, but from compassion. The more we try to force life into shape, the more we miss the shape it's naturally taking, and sometimes the healing doesn't come after you fix it. It comes when you stop trying to fix it at all. As Rumi reminds us, try to stay in the wound. It will teach you something. Because pain is not just something to escape, it's a messenger, and when you stop silencing it, it often becomes a guide. So if you're tired, not from the weight of what's wrong, but from trying so hard to make it all right, pause. You don't have to fix it all. You don't have to understand it all. You just have to stay present, soft, curious, because some wisdom only arrives when you stop grasping for control and start holding space for what's already speaking through the silence, and in that space you may find something deeper than answers. You may find peace. What if resting isn't what you do after you've proven yourself, but the proof that you already have? The world doesn't slow down. It values hustle. It rewards visibility. It teaches you that your worth is directly tied to your productivity. So you keep showing up, even when you're exhausted. You keep saying yes, even when your soul whispers no, but there's a deeper kind of courage, one that doesn't earn applause. It's the grace of choosing to rest. Anyway, in rest is resistance. Tricia Hersey, founder of the Nap Ministry, reminds us that rest is not a luxury. It's a right, a disruption, a reclamation. She writes, you are not a machine. You don't need to prove your worth through endless output. Choosing rest in a world that expects performance is not selfish, it's sacred. It's saying, I am worthy even when I do nothing. I am allowed to be still. Rest is not what you earn after you've performed. It's what you reclaim when you remember. You were never meant to perform in the first place. As Audre Lorde wrote, caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare, because to rest is to resist everything that told you your value lives outside of you. So if your eyes are heavy, if your heart is tired, if your soul longs to lie down, listen. You do not need permission. You do not need to finish the list first. You only need to remember you are not here to earn rest. You are here to receive it, and in that receiving, you offer the world something radical. A person who knows how to stop, how to soften, how to live a life not built on constant performance but on presence, peace, and grace.
What if you were never broken? Just taught to believe you had to earn your own worth. You've spent years trying to feel whole. You've read the books. Done the work. Checked every box that promised healing. And still, some days, you feel like something's missing. But maybe wholeness isn't a finish line. Maybe it's not something you achieve. Maybe it's something you remember. And the remembering begins when you stop trying to become and start learning how to be. In the Book of Awakening, Mark Nepo writes that our challenge is not to fill what is empty, but to empty what is full of pressure, of shame, of ideas that told us we weren't enough. You are not a puzzle missing pieces. You are not a problem to be solved. You are already whole. Not because you've done everything right, but because you were never wrong to begin with. The world profits from your self-doubt. But your soul has always known the truth. As Nayyirah Waheed wrote, you do not have to be a fire. For every mountain blocking you, you could be a water. And soft river your way to freedom too. There is no one way to return to yourself. But all of them begin with knowing that you already belong. So if you're still searching, still striving for that final piece, pause. It's not out there. It's not in the next version of you. It's in the remembering. The quiet inner knowing that says, you have always been whole. Even when you were healing. Even when you were unsure. Even here, now. You were never meant to earn it. Only to come home to it. And now. You are almost home. What if endings aren't the last page, but the place where something finally begins to breathe? You've walked far. Through silence, through storms, through stories you never thought you'd survive. And now, you're here. At the end of a chapter that asked everything of you. But instead of closure, you feel something opening. Because not all endings are doors closing. Some are doors returning. To places you forgot you were allowed to go. In the journey, Mary Oliver writes, one day you finally knew what you had to do, and began, though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice. That moment, the one where you choose yourself, is not a conclusion. It's a becoming. Every word you've heard, every pause, every breath in this journey was never about reaching a finish line. It was about reminding you that you can begin again whenever you need to. As T.S. Eliot wrote, what we call the beginning is often the end. And to make an end is to make a beginning. The end is where we start from. And this is your starting point. So if this feels like the end, let it. Let it be the soft landing. Let it be the deep breath. Let it be the final exhale of the person you no longer need to be. Because something new is unfolding. Not outside of you, but within you. And it's not urgent. It's not loud. It's just true. You don't need to know what comes next. You only need to trust that you've made it here on purpose. And maybe this ending isn't closure. Maybe it's your quiet beginning. The one you've been ready for all along.